Are we on? Would councillors please be upstanding for the mayor, or councillors please be upstanding? Thank you.
Turn that on, shall we? Good evening again, everybody, and welcome to this meeting. We do not have a reverend here, so I thought we might just have a few moments of reflection amongst ourselves, rededicate ourselves to the service of those who have put us here and whom we serve. And although we may strongly disagree with each other, can we make it a point to be polite and nice to each other, even though we might hate each other's policies, we should be able to get on with each other. So if we can just have a few moments of reflection, and that doubtless will lead to a peaceful, speedy, and constructive meeting. Thank you, everybody. Right, everybody, just to run through quickly housekeeping things of which most of us are very familiar. Obviously, raise your hand and indicate when you wish to speak, and we will try and pick you up in the right order. We are live streaming this meeting, so please remember again to be polite. As I was once told, say nothing here that your granny would not want to hear. We will vote using our electronic system as normal, and I'm sure we are all aware of it. Could we have one meeting, please? Abstain is in the middle, and I'll let you find out which is right and which is wrong. Recorded votes can be called for by 1+4, i.e. 5 members. We may do something by simple acclamation if it is uncontentious. Otherwise, we will use the electronic voting, as I say, unless someone calls for a recorded vote. Reminder, you have 4 minutes on the clock to speak, except for proposers, and you will get a 30-second warning. That, ladies and gentlemen, is not an invitation for everybody to take 4 minutes. Please be concise, as I need my evening cocoa before I go to bed. If you're making a point of order, it must be about a breach of law or a breach of a procedural rule, and you need to tell us which one it is. The agenda was published on the 14th of October, a supplement on the 17th of October, and then which contained items 7 and 10, and finally a further one was published later, containing item 11. So you should all now have all of those items. That I think is enough housekeeping. I don't think we need to do the fire alarms and the doors thing. I think we all know where they are. So I will ask Ben if there are any apologies for absence.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. You have received apologies for absence from councillors Atkins, Earwaker, Goodridge and Wicks this evening.
Thank you very much. Have there been any declarations of interest in advance?
There were none.
Thank you. Councillors, any declarations of interest you wish to make now before we proceed with the meeting? Thank you very much. Deathly silence is most welcome. The minutes of our last meeting, councillors, have been sent to you electronically and have laid on the table for the requisite time. Does anybody have a discrepancy in fact on the minutes? In that case, can I propose, please, that the minutes are accepted, and I would appreciate a seconder.
Please to second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Can we do that by acclamation, please, councillors? Agreed. Thank you. Right. Cracking on to announcements. The first announcement is a sad one, and I have to mourn the passing of past councillor Wyatt Ramsdale. a former Waverley Borough and Surrey County Councillor. Wyatt was a respected councillor who was always fair, had a good sense of humour, and in this way, he was an example to all of us in how local politics could be conducted. He struggled bravely with a serious illness for some time, and he will be sorely missed. And I think I possibly have a couple of people wishing to speak on this item. Councillor Coburn and the leader.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, some of us knew Wyatt very well indeed. Despite his somewhat gruff demeanour, he was actually a very kind man, one of life's true gentlemen. He was a brilliant friend for whom absolutely nothing was too much trouble. He was a conscientious and caring councillor who worked incredibly hard for his local community, both at borough level and at county level. He was also a brilliant and very committed campaigner. He refused to give in to his illness and to the treatment. And on his better days, he used to campaign with us. And honestly, he put us to shame with all his efforts. He was a remarkable man. But above all, he was kind and he was thoughtful. And our thoughts tonight and in the future must be with Barbara, his loving partner, and with his family, because they have to face a future without this special person walking alongside. May he rest in peace.
Thank you.
Leader.
Mr. Mayor, I of course echo your remarks and those of Councillor Coburn. On behalf of the administration, may I share your condolences and particularly to the family of Councillor Wyatt Ramsdale. Wyatt served with distinction, as has been mentioned, at the various levels of representative in Farnham. I briefly overlapped with him and knew him to be a courteous and dedicated representative, and most recently, of course, on that most important precursor body to what we now call the Farnham Board, one of course the most important things to deal with in Farnham. He will of course be sorely missed by those that knew him and worked with him, and again may I pass on my condolences to the family. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Does any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor Monroe? And Councillor Clark next.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Wyatt was a really good friend of mine, and in fact he took over from me as County Councillor for Farnham South, and I was really delighted that he did so. He was really energetic. Roads seemed to improve by magic as soon as I left, and I was delighted for that. He was an incredibly brave man. His illness, I mean, we all know it was terminal prostate cancer, which lasted for a very long time and involved quite a lot of nasty treatments, and I'm afraid ultimately was not successful. But it never let Wyatt, to my knowledge, down. He was extremely brave in sickness as in health, and I do mourn his passing as a colleague and a friend.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I had the privilege of being in the same ward as Wyatt Ramsdale, Recklesham and Rowledge, and we spent two years working behind the scenes on the new Rowledge Village Hall. Wyatt was a trustee, along with several other people who also were suffering from serious illnesses, and they used to joke amongst each other, let's hope this hall gets approved before we all pass away. The good news is that he did know that the Rowledge, the new hall, got planning permission. It got a very large SIL contribution, and we are still waiting for the Surrey Big Fund. But the village hall will go ahead, and I'm sure that will provide a suitable memorial for Wyatt and his hard work. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor wish to speak? In that case, could I ask you all to stand for a few moments in silent respect? Thank you, councillors. Moving on to happier things, I now have the pleasure of welcoming to this chamber Councillor Daniel Hussaini, who has recently been elected to this council. I hope you enjoy your time on this council. We'll all treat you very nicely, I'm sure, for this meeting, but don't take that as a prerequisite for later on in your time here. Councillors will have seen some correspondence about an overlong motion with amended motion that came before us and was approved by council at the last meeting. On behalf of myself and the officers, I will apologise to council for allowing a motion of more than 500 words to eventually be debated here. Please be careful how many words you stick in your motion, and please be advised that we will ensure that I don't have to apologise to you again for a longer motion, because we will be counting words like hawks. However, nothing in the amended motion was significantly different or contentious to do anything other than apologise to you for it, and it has been accepted, and we will move on. I would also like to draw to council's attention the award announced yesterday by the Britain in Bloom Group that Farnham has been awarded a gold medal and best in class in the town and city centre category. This is for the whole of Britain, not just the local southeast. It's the third time that Farnham has won this honour, and I think a note of our congratulations to Farnham Town Council and their workforce seems to be in order. Thank you, Council. Okay, coming to Mayor's announcements. I've tried to make them more informative and interesting, and the display you saw in the front will be a one-off. I don't intend to batter you to death with photographs all the time, but I was flattered to be presented with a certificate of appreciation by the Ukrainian group in Godalming for all that we have done for them. And I thought it ought to go on show for the whole of the council to see, because although it's addressed to the mayor, it's actually the council and very much their officers who are the targets of that certificate of appreciation. And while I was doing it, I thought I'd stick a few more photographs up there just to show you what the mayor may be doing for the rest of the month. As I say, you're not going to be bombarded with photographs for the future, but some of the interesting things that I have done by getting out and around. I read a lesson at the annual Surrey Masonic service in Guildford Cathedral. I went to a meeting of the Surrey mayors at the Surrey County Council offices in Reigate. The most interesting thing I did was to unveil a plaque at Farnham Station to commemorate 175 years since the station was opened. And that plaque is right outside the door of the station, so all the commuters can know that once there was a mayor of Waverley. Cutting the cake of the 100th session of the Farnham Repair Cafe was interesting. There were a number of celebrities here, there. Some are in the picture, but we also had Will Kirk from the repair shop. For those of you who watched the repair shop, came to see it as well. I attended a celebratory council by the aptly named Waverley Singers. And just to show that the mayor does go out in the rain and get dirty, I attended a gathering of the Outdoor Owls, an outdoor school in Shamley Green. On the young person's educational front, I also attended the annual admissions day at King Edward's School in Wormley, which is a really grand affair where the Lord Mayor of London sends his representative, and every single new pupil goes up and receives a certificate of welcome to the King Edward's Foundation. It's a very posh affair and interesting to go and see. I've attended a number of functions for elderly people, including Joy and Music at Cranley Village Hall, the Care Farnham AGM, the Farnham Assist Church Service, the launch of a new Sure Care franchise in Godalming, and the AGM of Rowley's in Cranley, which again, as we know, is supported by this council. I attended a premiere screening of the film about Tice's Meadow, which was saved by a multi-council group, basically initiated and forced onwards by this council, and a concert by Farnham Sinfonia, in which one of the soloists was a semi-finalist. She unfortunately didn't win it in the BBC Young Musicians of the Year. So a very, very talented group of people. I represented Waverley at the annual service for the judiciary in Guildford, and again got very, very muddy, opening a section of the towpath refurbished by the Way and Arun Canal Trust near Alford, again, which Waverley Borough Council helped to finance. The contrast between the deep mud at the start of it and the treated area that they worked on was wonderful to see. Okay, well, having spent a long time, perhaps overlong, telling you about what I'm doing, I will pass on to the leader and others, but cheekily, I will ask those that follow to be as brief as possible. Thank you very much.
Mr. Mayor, normally I will do my best to meet that obligation, but I've got a few updates tonight. So good evening, Mr. Mayor, members, guests. I have several internal administration notifications to give council before some reflections on some wider matters that are impacting the council more generally. To begin, may I also take this opportunity to welcome our newest councillor to the chamber, Councillor Danny Hussaini. Welcome. You will obviously have support from your own group, but there is, of course, support across the chamber for new councillors. I know perfectly well how scary it is to be sitting here in your first day surrounded by this sort of group of people in this setting. So there is help right across the chamber. Secondly, I would like to update council on some changes to within the political groups in the administration. I'd like to congratulate Councillor Peter Clark on his election as group leader of the Farnham Residents. I welcome Peter's experience back as a councillor and leader and look forward to working with him as we enter 2025. If you can believe this, the 6th year of the partnership between the Waverley Liberal Democrats and the Farnham Residents. I would also like to inform council of the election of Councillor Liz Townsend as deputy leader of the Liberal Democrat group. This change took place before the last council, but I neglected to communicate it, and so I'm doing so now. I'm also pleased to see that in terms of our party representation in our coalition, we are once again made whole with the readmission of Councillor Steve Williams to the Green Party, who have relented in their ceaseless campaign to discriminate against my colleague for some dealings during the general election. So it's good to see you and some of your other colleagues restored to your party. Finally, just in terms of internal administration, I'm also extremely pleased to notify council, effective immediately, the appointment of Councillor Gemma Long to the executive as portfolio holder for customer services and IT. Councillor Long brings extensive professional experience to this role, as well as a strong personal commitment, work ethic, understanding of both financial and social value, and a dedication to helping others that make her an ideal appointment and someone who will materially improve the capacity of this executive to serve the residents of Waverley as a whole. And I'm sure you'll all join me in welcoming Councillor Long to the executive. On to some external matters impacting the council. I would also like to report to council the frustration of the executive, but also of Guildford Borough Council and Waverley Borough Council, of the unilateral termination by Surrey County Council of the family support programme from the end of April 2025. This has been a cut right across the county, despite no confirmation that the core funding from central government has been cut, and with no proposed replacement, despite a statutory requirement to provide these services. The service deals with some of the most complicated and vulnerable family situations in our borough, currently helping over 120 families, with more on the waiting list here in Waverley. We will continue to push the county for clarity on how they intend to meet their statutory requirements to support some of these most vulnerable people in the county. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank Sam Hutchinson and her team for pulling together the details for both Waverley and Guildford to allow us to swiftly challenge this deeply regrettable decision by a county council that continuously proclaims to leave no one behind. I was also pleased to receive a letter from the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, MHCLG, it's back to its old name, regarding the future of local government funding. Pleased in the sense that it is good to be in dialogue with at least a government that admits there actually is a problem in local government funding, but dismayed once again to see that a general spending review has been delayed into next year, alongside persistent rumours, but no facts yet, that councils across the country will be saddled with a greater national insurance burden. Like many other council leaders across the country even, I eagerly await the details of the national budget to give some hope of a renewal to local government, and obviously reserve judgment until we've seen that national budget. But I, amongst others, will be joining a dialogue to consistently fight for more local government funding. But at least we have now a government that acknowledges there's an issue at all. So on that note, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I shall hand back to you.
Thank you. Monitoring Officer, do you wish to say anything?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Right, thank you very much. Then we will move on to item 5, which is questions from members of the public. I understand that there have been no acceptable questions from members of the public. Moving on to item 6, questions from members of the council. I am informed that there are no questions received from members of the council. We will therefore move on to item 7, which is corporate strategy. And I understand the leader will wish to propose this item.
Yes, of course. I'd like to move the recommendation, and I believe I have a seconder.
Seconder is?
I'm happy to second, thank you.
Seconder, do you wish to speak now, or do you wish to reserve your speech to later in the debates?
I'll reserve it till later, thank you.
Thank you. When you wish to speak, please indicate, and I will let you speak when you indicate, even if there is a queue of people, or you can speak towards the end, whichever you like. Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members, it is my great pleasure tonight to introduce the corporate strategy this evening. Can I start by thanking our officers for all the work that has gone into this, particularly Robin Taylor and his team for driving this project forward and dealing with the process of review, revision, presentation, around and round in circles to the point that we've all read this document a number of times. Can I also thank my colleagues on the executive for their contributions and their hard work in getting this document to the point. I won't go into the detail for your areas, but I'm sure you're going to speak for yourselves. But this has been a team effort across the board from officers and members. Can I also take the opportunity to thank all the members of the ONS committee for your comments? The executive and officers have tried to respond to all of the comments from that joint committee, incorporate them where possible, and reflect on anything that we weren't able to incorporate into the document fully. Appendix 2 is the list of all of those comments with the response from the officers and the executive. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the group leaders of the administration groups for their wider input over the last election cycle to distill the core elements of what you see here, converted into the required instrument for a borough council to deliver. In terms of process, members, this is the point where the corporate strategy precedes the detailed action plan that comes next. So the debate this evening is on the fundamentals of what this strategy aims to deliver. It is not on the stage that comes next in terms of the delivery plan. We obviously can't put the cart before the horse. But what does this all mean? I try to sum up this document in my commitment statement at the start. That very opening paragraph really does reflect where I sit on this. Waverley Borough Council aims to treat people and the environment with respect and kindness, and to conduct its council business in an open, inclusive, timely and democratic way, fair to all residents. This is a strategy devoted to building opportunity. A more sustainable borough, a more prosperous borough, a more inclusive borough, decent and affordable homes, a well-managed and resilient council. These are our aims, increasingly difficult to achieve in the economic and social climate of the United Kingdom in 2024, but to have any hope in succeeding in these goals, we must stretch ourselves. For me, failure to try is the only failure really that is measurable here. We will definitely not achieve any of these goals if we do not stretch ourselves to the challenges that are ahead of us. And with that, I welcome the coming discussion and will aim to address members' comments in my summing up. And again, please, my thanks to officers for all of the immense amount of work that has gone into this. And Mr. Mayor, I commend our new corporate strategy to council.
Thank you, Leader. Councillors. Councillor Austin.
Thank you. I would also, first of all, like to thank all of the officers for all of their work on this. We know the overriding purpose of any corporate strategy is to improve the organisation, to create and identify long-term goals aimed towards this improvement and support delivering success. So I think generally I like the presentation via the 5 key targets, and the document is certainly improved upon from the draft sent to ONS. I'm glad to see the executive has commented on each of the points made in the ONS committee meeting, albeit on a few occasions they appear to have missed the point being made by the councillors and therefore have not responded to the questions appropriately. I have to say I am still extremely unhappy about the comments in the section which refer to adding to savings already made by the collaboration. The executive's response to my querying this in ONS was that savings were presented to an ONS committee by the Section 151 officer and we await the local partnerships report. We do await the local partnerships report, but let's be clear about this. The Section 151 officer presented to ONS savings of 188 direct savings over the 3 years since the inception of the collaboration. That's direct savings again. Meanwhile, the total cost of Waverley's workforce is up by millions each year. FOIs of Waverley's accounts show us last year 3.726 million of this workforce cost of 23.1 million came from temporary and agency staff, which is extremely high as a proportion of total workforce. And last year, it was 2.6 million per annum higher than 2021 before the collaboration. It's on track to be even higher this year, by the way. So in this time, we have also had to we have lost and had to re-recruit our entire senior management team at great cost. So I strongly disagree with this phrasing that we are adding to savings already made. And I believe we are not being honest with our residents by having it in our corporate strategy. I'm keen to see what assumptions have been applied in the local partnerships report regarding total costs, direct and indirect. Turning to housing strategy, I think many tenants would balk at the statement that our homes are safe, well maintained and energy efficient. How many fire safety certificates was that outstanding at the moment? The ongoing issues with various subcontractors have been well described in social media by its customers. So although I agree this strategy should have an element of aspiration, I reiterate what I said in overview and scrutiny, that a successful organisation must be realistic about where it is right now. What the leader called stretch targets in the exec meeting last week, I think we need to call some of that out as pie in the sky. I'm afraid because of the wording regarding the collaboration, it's really impacting my view on whether I can support this strategy. If that wording was removed, I would be more amenable to supporting it. I look forward to seeing in more detail how Waverley intends to deliver it. I won't be supporting it, I'm afraid. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I have Councillors Williams and Merriweather, and delighted as I am to hear numerous people from the executive, I wonder if any non-executive members would like to intersperse between the executive sandwich. Councillor Williams.
Okay, I'll start the sandwich then. And I do believe that this corporate strategy is aspirational, and I recollect drafting with Councillor MacLeod the first draft of the previous corporate strategy, which went backwards and forwards and ended up with the strategy that we have had and have been working to hitherto. That, I think, was innovative. It was threaded with progressive values. It was as good as far as it goes, but it was put together rather quickly in order to give the previous administration a clear steer, particularly in the context of significant changes in direction, and not least the declaration of a climate emergency back in 2019. This corporate strategy, however, is a real step up. It's taken more time because it is more measured and because it needed to be more closely aligned to the commitments in terms of the direction that were made at the time of last year's local elections by the various political parties comprising the administration. It retains the concept of addressing the climate emergency. And I'm delighted that priority 1 is about a more sustainable borough. But as we have always made clear, tackling the climate and ecological emergency is not one-dimensional. You cannot have climate justice without social justice, so that we need to make sure that the burden of climate change and the remedies to it falls most on those with the broadest shoulders, and the benefits of climate change measures accrue most to those in the greatest need. So for me, the priority on which I lead is contingent not just on the resilient and well-managed council on which all priorities hinge, but also on a more prosperous borough, building a greener economy, a more inclusive borough, supporting those most in the greatest need, and also decent and affordable homes, homes that are warmer, homes that are energy efficient for our tenants. And our new corporate strategy is also set to become a unique exercise in engagement with the wider public and with other organisations out there. And I'm excited by the notion that it will be shared with partners who will hopefully work with us to secure these goals. And the journey, the route to how we get there will be open to consultation so that we can navigate our journey together with our community. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. I have Councillor Merriweather, then Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm very grateful to Councillor Austin for reminding us that this document is an illustration of our commitment to continuous improvement, which those of us who attended the Best Value training the other evening will know is at the heart of our mission to achieve best value. So although the specific financial elements of this document are on the tables at the beginning and specifically priority 5, the idea of sustainability and best value runs all the way through the document, because the document spells out our non-monetary spending and investment objectives and our pursuit of best value. The case studies, a couple of the case studies in there are particularly exciting and nice to see. The one on Oxford Ridge, for example, our social housing from our HRA, and I'm particularly pleased to draw everyone's attention to page 23, the case study for Waycourt East, which was an investment, a void investment that we picked up in 2019 that is shortly to be occupied by a GP surgery in Farnham with a pharmacy, one of the best examples I can imagine of us delivering value for our residents. Turning to collaboration, yes, there are finance and HR metrics that can be quoted, and I'll come back to Councillor Austin in a second on that. But again, back to continuous improvement, those are not the only metrics that we have to consider in our pursuit of best value, in our pursuit of continuous improvements. Our ability to level up best practice between us and Guildford, to learn from each other, to cross-fertilise, is another indirect value that we receive from this collaboration. I am very grateful to Councillor Austin for reminding us that only 3 years in, the collaboration has already paid for itself to the tune of nearly £200,000. And that's after recognising that the costs are one-off and the recurring annual benefits are already hitting £785,000 a year. That's information that's been provided to everybody. I'm also grateful to Councillor Austin for drawing our attention to the intense pressures that we face in the labour market. It is no secret to us or to anybody else in this economy that there are intense pressures on our planning department, not only in terms of finding skilled people to work for us at any price, but also the growing pressures that we face. Similarly, in our housing department, we have intense pressures on us to provide the services that our tenants expect. Those are the two areas where our agency costs have been under pressure over the last few years, and in this year's budget, they are down from last year's, and hopefully they will continue to fall as the labour market allows us to find permanent staff, permanent, skilled, qualified staff to fill the vacancies that we have. My congratulations to the whole team, and particularly the officers under immense pressure for producing this great document.
Thank you, Councillor. I have Councillor Hyman, followed by Councillor Liz Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We've seen a lot of corporate strategies over the years, and unfortunately, I don't think that this one's any different to any of the previous ones that I've seen. I refer to pages 12 and 13, particularly in the document, if you've got the supplement in front of you. Corporate strategy in the middle cog in the 5 says it provides the focus for all our activity. The focus in any sort of in any process at which you want to succeed, or there's a possibility of failing, of course, it's the goals, it's the targets that are the focus. Not the strategy itself. The strategy is how you get to it, and you have to have your eye on the goal, not on the strategy. So I think it's just a misunderstanding of how we should really be doing things. I was at the Beth Evans Best Value meeting with online with Guildford Borough Council the other evening, and one of the big issues there, of course, is that you have to have confirmed that you have to have a clear vision and clear strategy. Well, the vision has to come first, and that's the accumulation of all the targets, the objectives, and we have got the cart before the horse here. You simply can't put a strategy in front of what you're aiming at, and we haven't got anything that we're aiming at here. There's not a single, as far as I can see, a single measurable target which will tell our residents that we as a council know what we're doing, know where we're headed, know exactly what we're going to achieve for them. And to me, it's very, very disappointing that all we've got is a document which has got fantastic words, a lot of hard work gone into it, as always, in changing things around a bit. But it says, you know, look, priority 1, a more sustainable borough. So we're admitting that we're not a sustainable borough because we haven't had an appropriate assessment ever. We've been granting planning consents unlawfully for years. I mean, are we going to continue doing
Councillor,
that?
May I stop you, please, right there?
Yeah, and
no,
this doesn't address the things
stop,
we can't
please,
talk about
now.
in this chamber, Mr. Mayor.
Please stop now. The
Point of
mayor is
order, Mr.
standing.
Mayor.
No point of order. The mayor is standing. Be quiet. Now, we've had this illegal and unlawful for far too long. This has gone on for year after year after year.
Absolutely.
Quiet.
Too long.
After year. Now, let me put 2 things to you and to the rest of the council. 1, no one has the right to claim that someone else is doing something illegally and is a criminal. 2, if you believe criminality or breach of the law is going on, there are the appropriate authorities to which you shall go. Those Councillor
authorities have
Councillor
determined
Hyman, will you
this.
please be quiet? Those Councillor Hyman.
This is the issue, isn't
Councillor
it,
Hyman,
here?
will you please be quiet? Those are quotes from a document you yourself issued when there were thoughts that you might have done something illegal. Therefore, I would hope you would keep with them. Let me tell you what is going to happen from now on. Anyone, you included, who has a accusation of illegality, but by this or any other councillor, will be asked to immediately withdraw it. If they do not do so, I will take an immediate motion from the floor that they shall be silent. If that is taken, they will be silent. That is what will happen from henceforth, Councillor Hyman. I would advise you to withdraw the accusation of illegality, but since it was made before I gave you your final warning, if you do not, you may continue speaking. However, I have run out of yellow cards. The next one is red. You may now continue speaking.
Well, I think this is just, it shows us absolutely that there's no change going to be happening at Waverley, and this document simply signifies no change. If we can't ask questions, I mean, I have asked how many times, where is the appropriate assessment, and no one in this chamber will answer the question because they can't. So until we get someone who's honest enough to turn around and say, we actually haven't got an appropriate assessment, we have got to change our ways, as the government guidance stated we must, after the 2018 legal judgment, which is what determined that all councils and authorities had been breaching the law for many years, that the approach was wrong. That was the legal judgment of the courts. It's not me saying it. I think that there's absolutely no point in us putting through a document like this if we are going to be in denial. At the best value meeting that we had, it was quite clear that the big issue is councils that are in denial. And I'm afraid what we've just heard just confirms that this council has got problems, and this is just a sticking plaster or a carpet to sweep the problems under, I'm afraid. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. I have Councillor Liz Townsend, followed by Councillor Rabini.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would just like to thank also officers for all their hard work on this and for all of the work as being carried out by the executive members. And I am disappointed that Councillor Austin seems to concentrate purely on the collaboration aspects of the corporate strategy. There's so much more in this, and I would urge you to read it, because this overlooks the clear commitments we have made to residents, but also to local businesses as well. And I think it also shows a complete lack of understanding of the funding from local government by her government previously and by the new government as well. As the leaders already mentioned, we see no improvement in this position going forward, and we will probably see collaboration expand across the country as councils are seize opportunities of collaboration, but also on the savings of collaboration as well, in an attempt to make sure that we don't overburden our residents who are the council taxpayers. If Councillor Austin has come up with some alternatives for savings, then I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm very glad to see planning features very heavily in this document. This is an extremely important priority. Most of you will have seen the letter that the leader and I sent to the Deputy Prime Minister regarding the proposed changes to the NPPF. We do face an extremely challenging time ahead. We have highlighted these unrealistic housing targets, which could see the population of Waverley double over the next grow by about 50% over the next 20 years. I echo Councillor Williams' commitment to sustainability and for all of his work on our climate change neutrality action plan. And we again renew our commitment to our climate working towards net zero for this council by 2030. We also are committed to development across the borough that is more affordable and with supporting infrastructure, as well as confirming our support for neighbourhood plans. This council has continued to develop high quality council homes, as we are building at Oxford Ridge, developing more passive house new homes. And also we have the exciting project of the Cranley Leisure Centre, which is also passive house as well. So we are showing our clear commitment to not only the current generation within the borough, but also to future generations as well, which is really important. This corporate strategy is clear and concise. It outlines our priorities. It aligns with the economic development strategy as well that we've already adopted. And it also continues our commitment to the climate emergency, which we declared back in September 2019. I'm also extremely pleased to see that Waverley Training Services is within there, and we are already developing a strategy for growth for this service. We're also working very closely with our towns and parish councils and with our Hazelmere Chamber of Trade, and also the Godalming, Farnham and Cranley Chambers of Commerce, as well as the business improvement districts. I'm also extremely pleased to see that we are committed to continuing to communicate effectively with our residents so that they feel informed about the council and the services we provide. And nowhere more important will this be in the local plan, which we have already expanded our communication with our towns and parishes, involving in them at the very outset of the local plan process. So it is a corporate strategy to be commended. My thanks as well to Councillor Victoria Keel for all of her work on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I have Councillor Rubini, followed by Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I fully support this document. I would say that the corporate strategy we have in front of us will improve Waverley residents and workers right across our borough. My particular part is priority 4, decent and affordable homes. Despite continued government interference with lack of funding, different types of housing strategies, we still continue to build social housing. And I'm so proud of the way that we've done it, as was mentioned just now, on Oxford Ridge and other areas. And indeed, I am so pleased to announce in Hazemere, for example, that we are looking at social houses in the Hazemere area. And that is so difficult because, of course, we have so little brownfield land. Where are we going to build? This government is telling us about this grey sites. Are we going to damage, for future generations, these greenfield sites? We are trying to protect things for the future. And as far as I'm concerned, everything in this document goes in that direction. Decent and affordable homes, delivering homelessness strategy. So the people who haven't got a house can in future at least have somewhere to live with something over their heads. Living in high quality homes. There is no doubt we must be one of the leaders in actually providing proper housing that is eco-friendly and at an affordable rent. That is the most important thing as I see it. So as far as I'm concerned, putting in priority 4 and achieving it, if nothing else, will provide to our residents that we look at them and we want them and we do look after them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I have Councillor Martin, followed by Councillor Higgins.
Well, Mr. Mayor, thank you very much indeed. And there is much good work in this corporate strategy document. I would just draw members' attention to the facts and figures about our borough on, I can't see which page number it is now, but anyway, there's a lovely set of, after the second or third page, set of facts about the borough. I am disturbed, Mr. Mayor, by the fact that the average life expectancy for males is only 81.9 years, and I'm moving towards that rather quickly. And it's a great sadness as far as I'm concerned. And it was a great shame that the corporate strategy documents are not able to iron out the differences between females and males. Females live significantly longer. When are we going to sort that out, please, would be my question. But more seriously, I do share many of the concerns that Councillor Austin has made regarding collaboration savings. I have a degree of difficulty with many of them. I'll be interested to see the results that the local partnership report comes up with. Of course, the difficulty is that as we go on further and further and deeper into collaboration, it becomes more and more difficult to identify what the savings are, because we don't know what Waverley would have been like now had it continued as a standalone operation, what the level of funding would be, what the level of staffing would be, and what the level of compensation would be. So it gets more and more difficult to look for and find and genuinely believe in collaboration savings. Councillor Williams made a point about social justice and the burden of taxation needing to fall on the broadest shoulders. I thought I would share a little data. The official HMRC data recently published shows that the top 1% of earners with incomes in excess of £214,000 a year are forecasted this year to account for 28.2% of all income tax revenues this year. That's 28.2%. That's in fact up from a figure in 1979 when it was down at, if I can find it, I think it was about a third of that. It was 11%. So it's gone up almost 3 times in those years, which is interesting. The bottom 50% of earners will contribute 9.5% of all taxation. So less than 10%. That figure is down very considerably. In 1979, that figure was 18%. So over that time, the levels have already changed quite considerably. And I would just draw that to Mr. Williams' attention. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. I have Councillor Higgins, followed by Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I first had sight of the corporate strategy as a member of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. And when I read through the strategy, I could quite clearly see that at its heart, it had the residents' best interests at its heart. And I strongly believe that the priorities contained within the corporate strategy are the right ones. There's some excellent initiatives contained within the document. Councillor Hyman mentioned that there are no metrics or targets contained within the document. He is right to want targets and key performance indicators to ensure that the corporate strategy is delivered. However, this, as I understand it, will be contained with a delivery plan, which will be developed and presented in due course, and I look forward to seeing that document. The corporate strategy was quite rightly robustly scrutinised by the Overview and Scrutiny Committees. I was impressed with the fact that the comments and recommendations by the members of the ONS committees were clearly documented and were carefully considered by the executive, and the executive's comments and decisions were also recorded. It's quite clear that a number of the recommendations have been taken on board and amendments were made to this document. I'm pleased to see that there are objectives around mental health and well-being of our residents. In addition, I'm grateful to the executive for expressly reinforcing the council's commitment to use suppliers located within Waverley Borough Council wherever possible and in accordance with the procurement strategy and guidelines. So as a result, I'll be fully supporting this corporate strategy.
Thank you. I have Councillor Clark, followed by Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Looking at the document and the nice colours and the soft design, it's quite easy to underestimate the actual importance of the corporate strategy, because the corporate strategy, as has been explained, leads to the delivery plan. The delivery plan leads to budgeting and our financial council in February of next year. I think it really gets to grips with what our residents want and what they need. And finally, I think it's a marvellous and fantastic improvement on the previous one. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I have Councillor MacLeod. I have no one else showing, so unless anyone does, I will go to Councillor Keele.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm sure you'll remember that you were the leader of the council at the time of the original document referred to by Councillor Williams. And in fact, you were renowned at that time and still are for insisting on brevity. And I remember that you insisted that this was a single page A4 document. In fact, and it was quite difficult to produce a corporate strategy in that size of document. We had to reduce the font size, if I remember correctly, to get it onto an A4 page. But I do still recognise that some similarities, that the priorities in this document are very similar to the original priorities that Councillor Williams I drafted out and the original executive agreed. And this document does actually set out the outcomes as expected. So it's just at a high level, the local residents can hold the council accountable for whether they can achieve these priorities. So you can argue about what a strategy should include or should not include, as Councillor Hyman has done. But I think this is a useful document, a very useful document. It explains to our residents what the council is trying to achieve and the outcomes that we're looking for. So I fully support this document, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor MacLeod. No other councillors indication to speak. I will ask the seconder if she wishes to speak or waive her rights.
I'd like to speak. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm delighted that we've got to this point, a new corporate strategy for our borough, which has involved the views of staff, the executive, our scrutiny committees, and has been strengthened by each of those stages. Having worked with our officers closely on this, we are extremely lucky to have such a strong core team of officers who have supported us so ably on this, which has included staff from Waverley and Guildford, notably Robin Taylor, Jenny Sturgis and Luke Harvey, and of course the direction and support for the process from our CEO. I would also like to thank our councillor colleagues at Guildford Borough Council who met with us informally at the outset to discuss our ambitions for our two authorities and how we can work together on areas to achieve them. I would also like to echo the words of the leader and thank the executive for all their work and attention to detail and their expertise on their various portfolios. I'm really pleased that this has gone through such a robust process with the joint meeting of our two overview and scrutiny committees who made a number of suggestions and asked the right questions to help us develop this document further. And I would like to thank all members who attended that session for their engagement. I do think that this collaborative approach has strengthened the document that you see before you, and I think it is a very clear and coherent piece of work. As portfolio holder for organisational development and governance, I'm very pleased that we have a firm priority on being a resilient and well-managed council. The outcomes in this section will ensure that we're delivering value for money for our residents with a firm constitutional underpinning by having strong and effective governance. This work we see as happening around us all the time, for example, with our joint constitution review group with Guildford. Importantly here, we do reaffirm our commitments to the collaboration with Guildford Borough Council. I would like to echo the words of Councillor Liz Townsend. I'm also really keen that we explore ways of engaging with residents on our plans, ensuring that we're accountable to everybody in our borough. And of course, making a clear commitment about our staff, ensuring that we retain the fantastic workforce that we have by supporting their career progression and well-being. By investing in our staff, we aim to attract others to join us and to build their careers with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. I call on the leader to sum up, and I'm sure, leader, you don't need to remind me this is to sum up and not introduce new, interesting little side alleys.
I will endeavour to do so, within reason, of course. It's a little bit older than me, but I have a strange penchant for the song The Impossible Dream, the Andy Williams version, for lots of different reasons. Dream the impossible dream, reach the unreachable star being the words that it uses frequently throughout. And increasingly being a leader in local government often means narrowing the scope in the face of diminishing everything to the point that almost everything feels like an impossible dream at some point. Now, Councillor Hyman, the key word in that sentence that you neglected to mention was more. That's the only element of the words I'm going to comment on, other than the fact that, Mr. Mayor, can I personally thank you for your clear and robust response on the legal matters. Councillor Austin, the Section 151 officer has, as you have stated, presented the savings to ONS. You have been involved in the scoping of the local partnerships report terms of reference. Councillor Merriweather has discussed best value and addressed the financial and recruitment questions. Waverley does, of course, not exist in a vacuum, and I don't know how many times I need to repeat that. It seems to be some form of detachment or deniability or something that means that a decent part of this country seems to not want to acknowledge the state that the country is in for whatever reason. One would hope, though, that as an experienced councillor, you do take social media with a little bit of a pinch of salt. Individual failings, particularly in housing, are deeply regrettable. And to anybody impacted by a specific issue, I will take this opportunity to personally apologise for any distress that has been caused. I say this as someone who has had to assist my own parents in a social housing matter recently with similar issues. These are emotive issues because they are people's homes. But I must continue to urge any residents with concerns to ensure they actually contact the council. We see in a lot of cases where people put posts on social media, they haven't actually contacted the council. We can only address things that we know about and ensure that those residents receive the good service that is in fact the norm across our estate of over 5,000 properties. I will borrow the words of Councillor Rabini. I am so proud that we are the builder of social housing. And more than that, some of the best in the country for the environment and for the budgets of those residents that live in them. And sometimes when we're talking about a strategic document like this, it's nice to reflect on some of the things we have already done. We have built or have in development 149 social properties just since May 2023. That's not including all the ones that we built in the previous administration. More if you go back further, of course, and another 72% that are in the advanced scoping phases. So these are things that the strategy is talking about, but we actually have it in bricks and mortar. We've made that start. I'm incredibly proud of the work that we've done there. Councillor Martin, I note 1979, and that's isn't that the year Margaret Thatcher came into British politics? Yes, it's a little bit before my time, of course, but I'll leave that bit there. We will, of course, do our level best to ensure that you and people of a similar age live longer. I would personally suggest a number of peaceful lifestyle choice changes that may impact that for you. Councillor Higgins, I'm incredibly grateful for you pointing out the gaps in the previous drafts on mental health. This was an oversight that we sought to correct with alacrity, so thank you very much indeed. Members, I commend this document to you and once again thank all of our officers and those members that worked on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. The recommendation to Council to approve are 1, the approval and adoption of the corporate strategy as set out in Appendix 1. And secondly, to delegate authority to the Assistant Director for Strategy and Corporate Services in consultation with the Leader of the Council. Blah, blah, there's something very gone wrong with the typing here. The portfolio for something and something else, policy and governance, to make any necessary minor typographical changes and to finalise the document's design and imagery, which will please Councillor Clark, before publication.
Mr. Mayor, my apologies. May I call a recorded vote?
Not at the moment. 1, 2, 3. You seem to have enough. Yes. We will then take a recorded vote, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillors, when I call your name, please state whether you wish to vote for, vote against, or to abstain. Councillor Austin.
Against.
Councillor Barker-Lomax.
Abstain.
Councillor Beeman.
For.
Councillor Busby.
For.
Councillor Clark.
For.
Councillor Coburn.
Abstain.
Councillor Crowe.
For.
Councillor Davidson.
For.
Councillor Denis. Councillor Fairclough.
For.
Councillor Follows.
For.
Councillor Gale.
For.
Councillor Hess.
For.
Councillor Hussaini.
Abstain.
Councillor Higgins.
For.
Councillor Hyman.
Against.
Councillor Keane.
For.
Councillor Keel.
For.
Councillor Lawton.
For.
Councillor Long.
For.
Councillor MacLeod.
For.
Councillor Martin.
Abstain.
Councillor Merriweather. Councillor Miralles.
For.
Councillor Morrison.
For.
Councillor Munro.
For.
Councillor Murray.
For.
Councillor Nicholson. Councillor Ken Reid.
For.
Councillor Ruth Reid. Thank you.
For.
Councillor Raleen. Councillor Paul Rivers.
For.
Councillor Penny Rivers.
For.
Councillor Rabini.
For.
Councillor Spence.
For.
Councillor Staunton.
Abstain.
Councillor Steiger.
For.
Councillor Townsend. Liz Townsend, sorry.
For.
Councillor Philip Townsend. Mr. Mayor.
For.
Councillor Weldon.
For.
Councillor White.
For.
And Councillor Williams.
For.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have 34 votes for, we have 2 votes against, and we have 7 abstentions.
Thank you very much. That vote is therefore carried. We will now move to item 8, proposed changes to local choice functions. We have before us a report this evening to consider recommendations from the Standards and General Purposes Committee regarding proposed changes to local choice functions as set out in the Constitution. I understand that Councillor MacLeod will be putting this,
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you say, I'd like to move a recommendation on behalf of the Standards and General Purposes Committee set out on page 17 of your papers, and it's brief, so I'll read it out, that the local choice functions as set out in Appendix 1 to this report be adopted into the Constitution. I believe I have a seconder.
Thank you, Councillor Rabini, as seconder. Do you wish to speak immediately after the proposer, or do you wish to withhold until later in the debate?
I'll withhold, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor MacLeod, you may go ahead proposing your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to just put this item into context. We're now approximately halfway through a pretty large programme which started last November to refresh and renew our constitution, and also to do the same at Guildford Borough Council. There's 2 main objectives to this. The first is to actually update our constitution, which required it. There are certain things out of date. There are certain things that are no longer in line with best practice, and that's being looked at. And secondly, we wish to align with Guildford as far as possible for the reasons set out in the report. Just to say a little bit more about how the whole process works. In each instance of something that's going to be proposed to the council, we start with some very comprehensive papers from Susan Sale and her team, particularly Deborah Upton, who's Susan's main supporter in this thing. And these come to the Guildford and Waverley Joint Constitutional Review Group. Now, there's been 10 meetings of that group since last November, the latest of which was last night in Guildford. And they were attended, they're always attended, or should be attended by 4 people from Waverley and 4 from Guildford. And that happened last night with Councillor Goodrich and myself there in person, and Councillor Follows and Councillor Long online. In all of these meetings, there are long meetings, in fact. We go through in great detail, and we do make suggestions back to the officers, and they're updated. After that process, the review group makes recommendations to our Standards Committee and to the Guildford Corporate Governance and Standards Committee. And there's been 5 meetings of these committees, certainly in Waverley's case, but 2 of them have been simultaneous meetings with Guildford. And that process it's a new process. It's on the whole, it's worked pretty well. There's been the odd glitch here and there, but that's to be expected with a new process like this. So finally, of course, these things come to the council, as we're doing tonight. There's 2 items before you this evening. Now, I'll say something briefly about this item. In terms of local choice functions, it's actually explained what they are in page 18 of your report. If you care to look at it, in item 6, it explains what local choice functions are. And very briefly, they're largely regulatory functions that the government expects local councils to carry out. And it's up to each local council to decide where the responsibilities lie. And that's what's happening in this particular document. It's not all that much change from the previous document within our constitution, but there's a couple of things probably worth pointing out, in that there was an inappropriate thing within the previous constitution where councillors acted as an appeal body in terms of officers, where officers were conduct was being considered. That is not really appropriate. It's much more appropriate. It's the responsibility of the executive but delegated to the chief executive. And that's what's now happening under these new arrangements. In terms of other things, I think they're actually explained within the report, so I don't think I need to say much more, Mr. Mayor, and I'll pass back to you to open a debate if you wish to. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Any councillors wish to speak? Councillor Austin. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have here a paper which I have to say has quite a lot of words, but was lacking some context, in my view, which impacted on clarity for the reading of it. I did consult with the officer on behalf of my council group, who confirmed to me on a number of queries. So I confirm Appendix 1 is deemed to replace Appendix 2. This is something not stated in the report. The report merely states Appendix 1 should be adopted. That's right, isn't it? Yeah. And then I also understand now more fully, 6.5 essentially means what Councillor MacLeod has just said. The majority of local choice functions are regulatory and so delegated to officers. I think, therefore, we're happy to support this. But note, once again, we find ourselves facing more change, essentially to fall in line with the requirements of another council. Thank you.
Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I first of all just say thank you to Councillor MacLeod as one of the joint chairs of the group, his opposite number at Guildford Borough Council, all those slightly strange group of cross-party councillors who seem to enjoy discussing constitutional matters. Councillor Long and I are two of such councillors. Councillor Goodridge is another, I might add, as I think Councillor MacLeod is himself. It's a very detail-driven committee. We do sometimes get stuck in the weeds, but we do go through it in depth as is necessary. There has been from time to time areas where unifying the sort of the approach at both councils has required change from Guildford. There are some occasions where it's required change from Waverley. Actually, I think if we were to do a sum total of the two, in most cases, we've both agreed a new third position that makes more sense. Because actually both constitutions have considerably drifted either from best practice or indeed sense in a few cases. So in most cases, it is actually, I think, us just coming to a better third way for both councils simultaneously. There is, of course, the added benefit that officers in the joint working world can start to only have to deal with one set of rules, which leads to less issues and less errors at both councils. It's been a good opportunity, I think, to review the practice and the governance at both councils. And I think actually it's been a really constructive group across the board. It then has the secondary check, as Councillor MacLeod has mentioned, of going through the standards committees of those particular councils. The principal change here for us in this one is effectively recognising that the head of paid service is the head of paid service and needs to undertake those functions. So from that perspective, I don't think there's anything fundamentally at odds here, and it's just a lot of tidying in this particular one. There are and have been more controversial changes to the Constitution. I'm sure there will be to come, but this process, I believe, is fundamentally benefiting both councils to get to a better position in terms of its governance, which we are benefiting from just as much as Guildford. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Follows. Do I have any other speakers? Councillor Rubini, would you like to speak as the seconder?
I would certainly like to speak to say that it's all been said before. I won't take up your precious time. It's a straightforward document as far as I'm concerned and should be adopted by this council. It helps to make sure things are put right. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor MacLeod, would you like to sum up, please?
I don't think I need to say much more either, Mr. Mayor. I'll just point out to Councillor Austin, if she looks at the bottom of page 20, it does say Appendix 1 is the proposed choice functions. Appendix 2 is the current Waverley Borough Council ones. And Appendix 3, just for information, is the current Guildford ones. So it was actually said within the report what each of the appendixes are. Is it not in your copy?
I think we've now established it replaces it. Shall we not labour this one too much? Very well, let's put this one to the vote. Do we have enough unanimity that we can take this one by acclamation? Council? Thank you very much. Let us crack on to number 10. 9, I apologise. Righty ho. Proposed changes to the terms of reference for the Audit and Risk Committee and Standards and General Purposes Committee. We have a report before us that does that, and I believe this will also be introduced by Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Exactly as the last item, on behalf of the Standards and General Purposes Committee, I would like to move the recommendation that the revised terms of reference for the Standards and General Purposes Committee and Audit and Risk Committee, as set out in Appendices 1 and 2 of this report, be adopted into the Constitution. I believe I have a seconder again.
Councillor Spence, do you wish to second?
I'm happy to second this motion.
Thank you very much. Do you wish to speak now, or do you wish to reserve? Do you wish to speak immediately after the proposer, or do you wish to reserve your rights?
I'll defer my rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor MacLeod, you have the floor again.
I've very little to say on this item, actually. There isn't very significant changes to the Standards and General Purposes Committee's terms of references, but such as they are, they're set out in the report. And in terms of the Audit Committee, it's probably more appropriate that Councillor Spence speaks to that one. So that's all I need to say at the moment, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Any councillors wish to speak? Councillor Austin?
Thank you. Just to confirm on behalf of our council group that, as we can see, the proposals are supported by SIP for Best Practice and the members of the committees themselves, and in all of the cases appear to be regularising best practice. So we are in support of them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do any other councillor follows? Any other councillors wish to speak? Thank you, councillor.
Just to be clear on this one as well, this was an area where Guildford had something not at all, we had something better but not quite, and actually the third way once again is both councils doing it better. That's the whole point of this. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any other councillors? Councillor Spence, then, would you like to speak as seconder?
Thank you. Yes, I'm going to keep my comments to the proposed changes on the Audit and Risk Committee. Look, these are times when many councils are facing financial strain. We all know that. Therefore, the role of the Audit and Risk Committee has never been more important, and it's one we all need to take seriously. So the appointment of co-opted independent members who will bring additional knowledge and experience to our deliberations, particularly in the understanding of the financial statements and risk management best practices, will enhance our effectiveness. And it's something I very much welcome, and the other members of the Audit and Risk Committee, when we discussed this in September, were fully in agreement. As has been made clear in the papers, these proposals are in line with the best practices recommendations by SIPFA, and they've already been successfully adopted by many councils. Unlike other committees, the Audit and Risk Committee is not a scrutiny committee. It's not a forum to discuss policy or to make operational decisions. Our job is to provide assurance to you on the adequacy of the risk management framework, the internal control environment, and the integrity of financial reporting. Members need to bring their knowledge and experience of these matters to the table. They need to bring professional skepticism and be prepared to probe and challenge in an unbiased and apolitical manner. Now, if you'll forgive me, I will say I've been a chair of this committee for a little over a year and a member of it before that. And I've been struck by the seriousness and commitment that many of the committee members bring to our deliberations. However, I'd like to take this opportunity to observe that our committees are not always fully attended. Indeed, not all parties here have nominated members to fill their slots. At times, it feels
as if the committee is viewed as rather dull and inconsequential. So while bringing in co-opted members will help us, it is not a panacea that absolves us, all of us, as elected members, of our responsibilities. And I'd like to remind all members, and particularly the group leaders, of the importance of the work of this committee and ask you to be fully engaged with us. I commend the changes presented to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor MacLeod, would you like to sum up, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have very little I need to add, actually, but other than to again thank, as I've done before, the officers for their very professional work in this area, and also all the councillors who get involved at every level. It is actually a surprisingly interesting subject, actually. It seems a very dry subject, but it leads to very interesting, sometimes amusing debates. There was interesting debates last night from the Guildford side about a matter that was particularly Guildford orientated, which was quite interesting to listen to. So it's an interesting thing to do, and we're halfway through it. It'll go on to well into next year, but it's a very worthwhile exercise, Mr. Mayor. That's all I wish to say in summing up. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Since we have a certain equanimity of view on this, can I take this by acclamation, please? Thank you, councillors. We'll move to item 10, interim approach to creating joint posts. We have a report before us to consider this, and I believe the leader is going to propose it.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, pleased to propose this, and I believe I have a seconder.
I'm happy to second. Thank you.
Councillor Keel, do you wish to speak immediately after the leader, or do you wish to hold your powder dry for a while?
I'll wait. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Leader, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And thank you to Susan Sale particularly for these very clear proposals to move us forward in a key area, and I would class it as such because it's an enabling function that aids with the development of further collaboration opportunities. As I'm sure will have been noted by Council, both Waverley and Guildford recently approved a restructure in the legal and democratic services. That restructure included the introduction of joint posts. We needed to make sure that there was a benchmarking exercise to confirm what the salary uplift would be for joint posts. But we also need to take account of the fact that a wide-scale harmonisation of terms and conditions for both councils is an extremely large project, and itself should not be a barrier to dealing with services whose work enables us to firstly deliver better services internally for the council, but also ensure that the process of collaboration and joint working itself is governed in a reasonable, serious and also legal manner. As this paper presents, this is to enable the joint legal and democratic service function to exist prior to any large-scale harmonisation of terms, and presents recommendations to that effect. I'm sure there will be some questions. I'm very happy to answer them, but otherwise, Mr. Mayor, I shall hand back to the floor.
Thank you, Councillor. Any councillors wish to speak? Councillor Barker-Lomax.
Thank you. We have a revolving door in terms of our workforce, and we're over-dependent on agency staff with the commensurate increase in costs. I would suggest we need to steady the boat and not impose yet more changes on the workforce.
Thank you. Councillor Merriweather, do I have any other councillors indicating? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I could just gently push back on that observation. The reasons for the high agency costs are failures in the labour market, the availability of qualified people who want to work in our planning control and in our housing departments at any price. Trying to find people to fill posts is the reason why we take on agency staff to staff those places temporarily in the hope that the labour market eventually comes back our way. Thank you.
Thank you. I now have Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, we have another paper on collaboration, and collaboration, we're told, reduces costs and improves outcomes. Well, or does it? The recommendation that council is asked to approve on page 39 is actually to increase costs. Salaries of an unspecified number of employees or potential employees for the Legal and Democratic Services Department now and others later are to go up by 10%, providing they have the magic word joint in their title. Of course, it might have been worse. It might have been 20%, but we're advised in the paper that insufficient evidence was found to apply 20%. In paragraph 7.7 on page 42, we learn that the current practice based on the interim process for staff to work at alternate councils provides for a 5 to 10% uplift. I note that the 10% rather than the 5% figure has been used in this paper. As we all know, and as the leader has mentioned, in December of last year, this council approved a very large increase in the legal and democratic services staff and staff costs. There was discussion in the agenda paper then of higher grades and more in-house lawyers. There was no mention in that paper of higher salaries for those with joint positions. Of course, in the early days of collaboration, there was much talk of saving money. If you take two CEOs and make them into one, you can save money. How? Well, you only pay the new position at 25% more than the old, and hey presto, you save 75% of one of the salaries. But this paper struggles to deliver such savings. It seems to say that if you have joint in your title, then you simply get paid more, irrespective of whether any savings have or already being created by the amalgamation of any two posts. Forgive me, Mr. Mayor, for being a little suspicious. I guess that I should draw comfort from paragraph 7.13, which says that this policy will only be applied to joint posts considered to be urgent and necessary, and in consultation with the Corporate Leadership Board, having taken into consideration the collaboration partnership principles, transformation and collaboration programme objectives, and each council's corporate strategy, priorities and plans. Gosh, what a lot of words, which seem to tell us very little. These positions should be few in number, but there is no definition of few. And as I've already said earlier this evening, as time goes by and as collaboration becomes ever deeper and more embedded, it is more and more difficult to understand whether savings are being made. 4 years on, it's just not possible to know what the staffing levels and pay levels would be for this council if no collaboration was actually in place. Paragraph 7.29 of the paper tells us that all the proposed new joint posts in the Legal Democratic Services Department are growth related. Well, would that growth have been necessary or taken place if Waverley was still a standalone council? So, Mr. Mayor, I will actually not vote against this proposal, as I realise that interim arrangements probably do need to be put in place, but I am full of scepticism as to whether savings are being made and whether better outcomes are really being delivered for the people of Waverley. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Do I have any further councillors wishing to speak? In which case, would the seconder like to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to share the leader's thanks to our officers for preparing this paper. As we're all well aware by now, the purpose of our collaboration is to allow us to reduce costs and improve our outcomes. This approach to joint roles helps us to make savings by reducing the need for two roles. And of course, it would be appropriate for somebody who's working across two authorities to have a 10% uplift. But savings aren't the only benefit of this approach. There are far more. Joint posts can improve our resilience, reduce our risks, and help to streamline our service delivery and therefore aid the experience of our residents. So while we, of course, need to harmonise our working practices longer term, we need to be able to respond in an agile way to short-term pressures by creating joint roles between the two councils where we feel that it is necessary and where there is evidence to back this up. The longer term discussions need to involve apologies. Sometimes we will need to be able to implement joint roles ahead of the harmonisation of the working practices that need to go ahead. And these policies, processes and systems will help us to do this in a consistent way and create the governance to do this properly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Leader, would you like to sum up?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. It does still baffle me a little bit that some members on the other side of the chamber forget that this sort of joint working is actually so common, so many councils, so many different political incarnations and none, that it is actually pretty mundane when you look at it in the wide field of local government as a whole. This is not unusual. And you can tell it's not unusual because we get to reference sections of the Local Government Act quite frequently when we actually do these things because it's so common, it's actually in the rules and in the law. So it's something that is bread and butter. In most cases, we're not even having to actually do this again ourselves. We can borrow it from another council that's been doing it either last year or 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And as you've seen, the past government and this one are clearly moving to models of things like combined authorities because there is simply not enough money in the system to sustain the level of local government that we've had for the past, say, 25 years in the way that we have. And Councillor Barker-Lomax, I mean, it would be wonderful just to randomly disassociate ourselves from the labour market and go, let's do it differently. It just doesn't work like that. I mean, if you're looking at a planning function, for example, and we as a local government authority can pay X, what's the competitor? A major developer. I mean, there is a reason why we will struggle to retain staff in that sort of model. Councillor Martin, you've yourself referenced the very legal and democratic structure restructure that was the precursor to this document. It makes it very clear the points that Councillor Keele has then suggested regarding the approach to reduce cost and improve outcomes. Councillor Keele has covered that far more succinctly than I ever will, so I won't repeat her. And on that point, Mr. Mayor, I move the recommendations to Council.
Thank you, Leader. There is enough suspicion on this one that I think we will have an electronic vote, please. For those in doubt, green on the left is support and red on the right is against.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That is 41 in favour, 2 abstentions and none against.
Thank you very much. That is therefore carried. We now move on to item 11, a review of the numerical allocation of seats and committees on political groups. We have a report before us. This is basically an exercise in mathematics, and it is a legal responsibility of the officers to perform this magic of numbers whereby the number of seats that have been elected translates into seats on committees. It is also in our constitution that our group leaders put forward their recommendations for seats on the committee. I am assured by the group leaders that this has been done, and therefore I am happy to move this recommendation, and I trust somewhere in the room I will have a seconder.
Pleased to second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Leader. I don't appear to use up my full 6 minutes on this. As I've said earlier, it is a mathematical function performed by officers, which I am pretty sure they have performed correctly, and the group leaders all assure me that they have moved forward. Do any councillors wish to speak on this matter? Councillor Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll stand up for this one because I'm down this end. So I'm a little bit disappointed, and I know protocol says that this shouldn't be debated. However, there's one element, and Councillor Spence highlighted it very carefully, that the Audit and Risk Committee, which is such an important scrutiny and function for the council, we've lost. Farnham Residents Group has lost one seat on that committee. However, there is a seat for the Labour and the aligned independent seat, which has never been used because the two members of that group are both on the executive and can't be on the executive and can't be on the audit and risk group. So I'm just wondering, if they're not going to ever take up this seat, could we not give that seat back to Farnham residents, and then Julian and Michael and the Audit and Risk Committee will not have the danger that, as we've only got one member on the Farnham residents on that committee, and it's Councillor Beeman, who unfortunately can't drive and can't get to that meeting, so it's a tricky thing, that maybe, I know it's political and I know it's numerical and I know it's a democratic thing, but in practical reality, they're not going to take up that seat, and we could have that seat and we'd have a member available. And then the problem which the chair and the vice chair of Audit and Risk would not have that problem. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Follows.
So a couple of things. There are a couple of areas where members of the executive are constitutionally disbarred from sitting. That is obviously ONS. It is also the Standards Committee, where there is an exception for one member of the executive to serve and no more. The Audit and Risk Committee does not have a barrier for members of the executive at all. There's no constitutional barrier to that. Just to give an overview of what has actually happened here, there has obviously been a small adjustment in the political proportionality of the council, with the reduction of one Labour member and addition of one Conservative member. The independent members of this council, not formally constituted as a group, cause a bit of an anomaly when you're doing these calculations. The previous incarnation of this report had the Labour and aligned independent, and they will again be Labour and Green with the resumption of Steve Williams in the Green Party, were previously assigned two roles that they could not constitutionally hold. Now, in consultation with the other group leaders and with the independent members, a version of this has been created to allow the planning seat that was previously assigned to the Labour and Green group, which they could not constitutionally sit on because they're members of the executive, and the ONS seat that they were granted that they also could not sit on, to effectively be dealt with by the independent members, so that the Labour and Green group were then allocated seats that they could actually attend, i.e. licensing and audit and risk. So unless they wish to contradict me, the Green and Labour group, I'm assured, will be nominating a member to the Audit and Risk Committee, noting, of course, Councillor Spence's incredibly important point that is one of the most important committees of this council, and indeed licensing, which requires training. So unless I've misrepresented that, I don't believe I have. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Spence.
Apologies, I think, to our leader, but I think I have to point out that in the terms of reference that we've just agreed, paragraph 2.2 of the Audit and Risk Committee, in terms of reference, state the members of the committee must not be executive members.
Councillor Austin.
Thank you. I mean, I have raised this query, as you know, to the monitoring officer and Ben Bix this last week. I do think that the spaces should be taken if they can be taken. And I agree with George Murray. And I think on behalf of our council group, we would be happy for a Farnham resident to take that spot if they wanted to. Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we will have a short adjournment of council. Could the group leaders come this way and we'll have a discussion with the monitoring officer, please? The leaders of all the political groups and myself and the monitoring officer and just about everybody else have had a long look at legal papers and discussion on this. The proposal put forward by Councillor Murray and agreed by many is possible, provided the council will support it. Can I have council approval to take that forward, please? Yes? Sorry, what we intend to do, okay, what we intend to do, and I would need a mover and seconder from the floor, is that a Farnham resident councillor will occupy that position instead of the current Labour/Green group. Audit and risk.
May I propose that I would request under the circumstances, Councillor Austin, if you be my seconder in this case.
I'm happy to second.
Yeah. Councillor Davidson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think as Councillor Spence pointed out earlier on, this is the Audit and Risk Committee should not be considered as a political appointment. And I believe that we should open it up as far as possible for a suitable number of members on that committee to be from any member of the council. And I believe that we should also include a possibility are independent members in this room, many of which have got wide experience. And I feel it also saddened that Councillor Gale, who had made a major contribution to our licensing committee, is not even there on the list. So I find that slightly disappointing.
First of all, I would like the monitoring officer to give us some legal advice. We have a way of having a temporary solution to this particular problem, which it seems all the group leaders are happy to move forward with. And we can reconsider this matter in May, but I will defer to the monitoring officer to give you legal advice on this. But basically, what all the group leaders have agreed would need council's support. And personally, I would rather we didn't introduce more red herrings into what has already become a slightly fraught process.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted members to be clear of what's being proposed here and what we are doing. So we have calculated in accordance with the political balance rules, which does give that group that one seat on the Audit and Risk Committee, which they unfortunately now can't take by virtue of both being executive members. There is provision in the Local Government and Housing Act 1989, Section 17, for exceptions to political balance requirements, which provides that if no member of the authority or committee votes against the proposal, it is permissible to go outside of the political balance rules. So the proposal before you is that the Labour and Aligned Independent seat on Audit and Risk is given to the Farnham Residents Group. That does take the Farnham Residents Group over their entitlement under political balance regs, and it does mean that the Labour and Aligned Independents are one seat under their political balance, which is outside of the political balance regulations, but would be permissible if it was unanimously supported by council. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
We have a formal proposal before us. We have the monitoring officer's legal advice. I would like council, please, to approve this rather than going off into multifarious other ways. We are saying that as of next May, we will come back and review this situation, at which time we may consider changing the terms of reference of the various committees. So we are not giving a blanket approval, we are giving something that will temporarily allow a representative onto the audit committee, which is badly needed, and will move this process forward. Failing that, we go into limbo. So I would please ask, will council approve the motion before us unanimously, please?
Agreed.
Thank you, council. Right. Let's crack on then to item.
We've still got somebody indicating, and we've just done it by green because it's controversial. Can you take it in a vote? No, no. But I just wonder if you should take a vote for within consent because it's a legal requirement tonight.
Okay, we have a legal requirement that it shall be unanimous. I please would not ask any single councillor to throw this into a mess and object to it. Councillor Murray, if you really wish to speak, you may, but I'd rather nobody did.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I only wanted to say thank you to the members. This is not a political thing on my part. It was purely to listen to Councillor Spence and the chairman of the committee to fill that seat. He was purely not, I don't mind it if it's an independent on that seat. It's not purely, we'll add a foreign
I think we've got
resident,
far enough, Councillor Murray.
Okay.
Could we just stop
Thank you.
there, please?
Okay.
Before we muddy the waters.
But can you just take a proper vote so that we can?
Do we have any councillor who wishes to object? Thank you. Okay. You could be as content with that as you can be.
Yeah, I would prefer to vote.
Yeah, I know, but it is unanimous if nobody objected. Okay, let us move on then to item 12, which I'll dig out of my sheets in a minute. Right, okay, thank you. Item 12, right, motions from councillors. Okay, excitable executive, calm down. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have two motions before us. The first one is from Councillor Keele, and may I compliment you, Councillor Keele, on having exactly 500 words.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I did check the word count. I would like to move the motion in my name and I have a seconder.
Seconder is?
Happy to second, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Clark, do you wish to speak immediately after the proposer or do you wish to speak a little later?
You'll probably be grateful if I do it now.
Councillor Keele, the floor is yours with Councillor Clark close behind you.
Thank you very much. This motion asks Council to agree to lobby the new government and Parliament on councils being able to decide for themselves whether they can hold meetings in a hybrid manner. I believe that the current requirement to hold in-person meetings only is a barrier to local democracy and narrows participation. This is an issue that could affect anybody in this room, anyone with caring responsibilities, for example, elderly or ill relatives, or children, or those with illnesses, disabilities, and other personal circumstances such as full-time employment. At the moment, members may not be marked as present or vote at a meeting if they join remotely. This motion doesn't prescribe what this would look like for Waverley, as in the event of any change in the law, this would be something for councils to determine, with all of the relevant scrutiny and oversight functions being involved in what would need to be a constitutional change, should council wish to make a change. Council would be the body to decide on whether it would require any qualifying criteria or quorums or any other rules around this. I'm aware that this is something that Waverley has lobbied on in the past. We have a renewed opportunity to put this issue before a new Parliament and a new government. Indeed, a press release from the LGA in August of this year notes that the new Minister of State at MHCLG has signalled that they may be open to looking at flexibility around virtual attendance at council meetings. The LGA has stated that councils should be given the flexibility and freedom to choose for themselves on this issue. They undertook a survey in 2023, which showed that of the councils surveyed, 93% supported having powers to be able to introduce virtual and hybrid technology for statutory council meetings. They raised the important issue that the recruitment and retention of councillors, particularly those balancing career or care commitments, could be hampered if powers are not given to councils to hold hybrid meetings. No council surveyed wanted to hold fully virtual meetings, but the vast majority wanted the power to hold hybrid meetings for those who needed it. The LGA noted that without such powers, communities will needlessly lose good councillors and prospective candidates would be put off for standing for election due to in-person meetings, creating a barrier to engagement with local democracy. The LGA stance is also supported by the Association of Democratic Services Officers and Lawyers in Local Government. By agreeing to lobby on this issue, we can add our voices to this growing campaign and present our views to MPs and to the government. Speaking of Parliament, it may surprise you to learn that the House of Lords is in fact far more progressive than local government in these matters. The self-regulating House is able to make its own decisions and has chosen to ensure that those with long-term disabilities who may be physically unable to attend the House can, under Standing Order 24A, apply for eligible member status to participate virtually in all business and to vote electronically or by telephone. Some members of the House with exceptional need have secured the ability for assistants to speak their speeches on their behalf in the House. They are, I would argue, light years ahead of where we are in local government. I believe that this would very much help to widen participation for those who might wish to stand in the future and to enable current councillors to be able to perform the roles to the best of their ability to serve their communities. And I hope this is something that we could all support. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Clark, followed by Councillor Staunton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In seconding this motion, I'd just like to make a few comments about democracy. Residents have a right enshrined in law to expect their elected members to attend decision-making committees in person. But our residents also have a right, not enshrined in law, to expect 100% of their elected members to be able to participate and vote on those decisions. Exceptional circumstances sometimes mean that members are not able to attend in person. And current legislation means they are excluded from the democratic process. How things have changed since the 5th century BC in Athens, when the literal translation of the word democracy meant rule by the people. Moving on to 1430, you could only be elected to Parliament if you owned a property worth 40 shillings. This rule stayed in place, believe it or not, for the next 400 years. During this period, bribery and corruption were commonplace, with influential landowners offering to support their favourite members of Parliament by buying them articles of clothing. Having done some historical research, I understand that amongst those MPs, codpieces were the much sought after article of clothing. And in these days, there was no such thing as a register of interest or declaration of gifts or hospitality. But our democracy has undergone sweeping changes for the better since then. So why stop now? Looking at the timeline of Councillor Keel's motion, we should recognise there are 3 separate stages. First, the motion is approved this evening and a letter is sent to our MPs to lobby central government. Second, at some point in the future, His Majesty's government responds positively and either informs us of caveats imposed centrally regarding the exceptional circumstances or allows councils to determine their own. Third stage, it comes back to council in order to debate the exceptional circumstances caveats and could even request Standards Committee to consider adding them to our constitution. Whilst members may speak about the importance of such caveats, going into too much detail of what they may be at this stage would greatly exercise our minds without being productive use of our time this evening. So I'm happy to second and support the motion with one caveat of our group, because they do support it in principle. The members that I consulted who responded did accept in principle, but the main caveat, this was not to become the norm. When democracy was first put into practice these 2,500 years ago, instead of using Zoom, for some reason, the ancient Greeks used black and white pebbles to record their votes. More fool them. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. I have Councillor Staunton, followed by Councillor Austin, and I have a growing list of people interested in this topic, which is surprising.
Mr. Mayor, I would like to support this motion. Some sort of remote hybrid option seems to me a sensible, common sense approach for local government to meet primarily physically, but to permit virtual attendance in case of, for example, short notice difficulties in obtaining childcare provision or because of the distance to travel, especially on occasions of bad weather. If the House of Lords are permitted to serve on committees meeting remotely, one of just 2 parliaments in the world that still retains a hereditary element, the other being Lesotho, my point being that it is not exactly a bastion of rushed, hurried, unthinking change, then it cannot be beyond the wit of man to modernise local government in a similar manner. And that is why I should be supporting the motion.
Thank you, Councillor. I have Councillor Austin, followed by Councillor Barker-Lomax.
First of all, I want to thank Councillor Keel for reaching across the council chamber to engage in a pragmatic and sensible way. Thank you. Out of respect for the various views of my council group, it was not appropriate for me to second this motion this time, but the gesture was appreciated and a welcome example of how interactions between councillors and council groups can be civil and constructive. I feel very honoured to have been elected as a councillor, and as such I do feel I owe it to my electorate to turn up in person and vote. I think the default position should always be that we do turn up in person, but I acknowledge that sometimes this is really hard. It happened to me, a meeting missed because my child became unwell and I could not leave them with a sitter last minute. I was not able to participate in the meeting, albeit my speeches were ready and I could have contributed remotely. I look around the room and I don't see enough representation from all different groups across our community standing as councillors. I don't see enough women or young parents. As chair of the Conservative Women's Organisation for Surrey, I am passionate about getting more women into politics and supporting greater diversity. When I ask women why they are reticent to stand, it is not that they are disinterested in local and national politics. Quite the opposite. The main reason cited to me is the potential hostile environment in the council chamber. I mean, I don't know what they're talking about, what a friendly bunch we have been tonight, and trolling on social media. It's understandably off-putting for many. But the subsidiary reason is the concern about committing to evening meetings without a level of flexibility. It is right, therefore, to at least explore how we could improve this. This will come down to the details. For example, I think there would need to be a minimum attendance in person in order to qualify to vote remotely in the exceptional circumstances you can't make it. I feel there are certain meetings where it's more important to mandate being present in person, like full council. I worry if we are all online, the standard of debate would be diminished, which is not in the interest of those we have been elected to represent. Finally, I think it would have to reach a point where the IT works sufficiently well, we can trust it, and we are clearly not there yet. On the basis that this is essentially a motion to lobby for an amendment to the national legislation, and as point 7 of the council notes section of the motion states, this would be all subject to further debate, I am happy to support it.
Thank you. Councillor Barker-Lomax, followed by Councillor Coburn.
Thank you. Given that the average mile driven in a car generates 0.4 kilograms of CO2, and given that we have up to 50 councillors travelling 5 to 10 miles per meeting, attending council meetings in Waverley in person generates thousands of kilograms of CO2 per year. Therefore, I agree that we should lobby for more flexibility to attend council meetings remotely, whilst also acknowledging that it would be wise to introduce flexibility on a gradual, hybrid and closely evaluated basis.
Thank you. Councillor Coburn, followed by Councillor Liz Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm slightly conflicted on this. I mean, nobody could want younger people in this chamber more than I. I've spent my life trying to get younger people involved in everything important in the world. But I do have an issue with the detail, I suppose. And you're right, we're not looking at the detail tonight, so why am I worried? Well, I am worried because of the way decision making has sometimes done in this chamber. And, you know, what I'm worried about is that we will go down to the level of the lowest. It happens in most parts of society. And we will have, if we're not careful, a group of councillors who are not in any difficulty. They just can't be bothered getting off the sofa, getting into the car and driving here. They'll just walk into the kitchen and do it online. And I think what we have got to do is always say how proud we are as councillors to come into this council chamber. And I think we have to demonstrate that to the public, that when we're here, we are working hard on their behalf and we are privileged to be here. We can only do that if we are all together in the council chamber. I would be very loath for any full council meeting to be held totally online or even hybrid. That doesn't mean that if somebody doesn't have a last minute emergency or some problem, that we can't introduce something that deals with that issue. But I do think the meetings that I really dislike is when you have to chair and also to be at, when you have a sort of majority in the room and then the odd one behind you, as it were, and you think you've finished the argument and then the one behind wasn't quite paying attention and then joins in with something totally irrelevant. So if we are going to do it at all, I think full council should definitely be an in-member meeting unless, you know, as I say, you've got some exceptional circumstances, then we could perhaps accommodate that. But I do think the IT, having looked at myself for 40 minutes yesterday, convinced that it was my ineptitude, I then discovered it was the Waverley IT system that had completely let us down. I was going in and out like a yo-yo. No, it's not a yo-yo, so they go up and down. Anyway, I kept going in and out. I was so convinced it was me. And we have, if we are going to do this at all, whether it's on one tiny exception or whether perhaps being a little bit more generous, we do have to make sure that our IT is really up to standard. But I know that's further down the line. So I can't be 100% here because I am worried that if we are too lenient, the lazy people will be lazy, as they always will be. So with that caveat, I'm swithering. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Liz Townsend, followed by Councillor Crowe.
Thank you. And just to put your mind at rest, as Councillor Keel emphasised, we're not getting into the detail here. And if the council approves this motion, that detail will come. But my understanding from what Councillor Keel said is that this will be exceptions and the details of those exceptions will be fully documented in the future. As has been said, the overwhelming majority of councils surveyed by the Local Government Association want the powers to be reintroduced for virtual and hybrid technology for statutory council meetings. So that shows there is demand out there, and that shows that there are an awful lot of people that think that what happened during COVID, where council meetings carried on and we were able to use the technology, yes, obviously the technology has come on since then, thank goodness, but that shows that we can still make good decisions during that, whether it's a meeting in person or a hybrid meeting. I'm not envisaging that we would have fully online meetings, but again, that detail would be to come. I mean, within the local government survey that they've done, they found out that 84% of councils found their councillors with work commitments would benefit from hybrid meetings. And obviously we were talking earlier about Councillor Beeman, who can't drive and couldn't take up his place on the audit committee because he couldn't get there. Now maybe. Sorry. But harder for you, sorry, Councillor Beeman, to get there. So again, there may be times that he would benefit from a hybrid meeting. And 64% of councils thought their councillors with childcare commitments would also take advantage of these changes. It also could help to attract more people to these, what are important roles, as other councillors have said, and provide a far wider range of voices. You know, people with full-time caring responsibilities, disabled people coming forward, perhaps who wouldn't otherwise come forward to fill places. And that makes our council, that enriches our council and makes it far more representative. And as has already been said, we do risk putting councillors off who can't be here till 10 o'clock at night all the time. And when we do have late meetings, you know, so it is important that we create a system which will attract people to these roles. And it was found actually during the pandemic as well that hybrid meetings also increased public attendance as well and created greater engagement in the local democratic process, which is something I'm sure, again, we would all very much welcome. So I very much see the benefits in us lobbying, as we have done in the past, for hybrid meetings. I think it's really important that laws, you know, rules made over 50 years ago or about 50 years ago, that we look at them and we relook at the needs of the people for today. So I very much support this motion.
Thank you. Councillor Crowe, followed by Councillor Follows.
Thank you very much, and I will be brief. I completely agree with, I think, all the comments in the room, and I also acknowledge the concerns and reservations made about this proposal. I support the proposal wholeheartedly, however. In a general sense, I think council members should be able to perform their duties without restriction. And if someone genuinely can't attend in person, then I see no reason why they can't participate, supported by the technology we have at our disposal, as long as it works. More specifically, as I know from personal experience of being a single parent years ago and more recently a full-time carer to my late father, I would have found it difficult some of the time and impossible occasionally to attend in person, thus barring me from any involvement. Making participation in local government awkward for groups like single parents, carers, the housebound, for example, is in my opinion undemocratic and discriminatory, as well as just outdated. I think we need the flexibilities outlined in this motion so a wider demographic than at present may avail itself of inclusion in public life. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Follows, followed by Councillor Long.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I do, of course, support this motion. It is, in essence, about flexibility. My own version of this was most common when I was expected to be at my day job office 100% of the time before it adopted similar practices. I, for example, was at the Surrey Research Park where my day job office is. Even the slightest bit of traffic would sometimes prevent me getting back to a meeting or being late. On one occasion, I missed being able to vote on a planning matter in my ward because I physically couldn't get back. I could have easily stayed in the office on that exception, dialed in, taken part in the debate, and then come in afterwards or miss the rest of the meeting. But I easily could have exercised my democratic duties and represented my residents in a way that I don't think would have offended anybody and would have been reasonably considered to be a one-off. Councillor Staunton, borrowing your words, this is just simply a common sense decision. I do, however, agree with Councillor Austin that the default should be in-person attendance if we're ever looking at this. And I would also agree that there are certain types of meeting where it is absolutely more important to be present in person. And that, again, should be something that in a future situation where we're allowed to explore this, that standards should consider seriously. As Councillor Barclay-Metz points out, this motion accommodates the issue regarding environmental footprint in point 6. Very few members can easily walk here. I think in practice, only myself and Janet are realistically within walking distance easily for a meeting at short notice. And at the end of the day, only the Godalming members are really relatively reasonably in walking distance or short journeys. So it's something that would allow us to deal with that too. I personally am proud that I'm usually working for the people that elected me wherever I am, often despite where I am. And actually, most of what you do as a councillor is not what takes place in these rooms. And we, all of us, almost always comfortably do that from wherever we are. I do a lot of traveling for my day job work. I answer residents' emails. I deal with queries. It doesn't matter where I am. The only thing I can't do remotely is physically vote. And that's kind of the last bit of being a councillor, often not the first bit. So for me, widening the franchise of people who can be present in this room in any capacity is something that we should strive to do. It is simply the right thing. It will also, I think, addressing Councillor Coburn's point, address lazy councillors. We all have them. It's always going to be a case for political parties. We have a duty to try and deal with them, but it'd be certainly a damn sight easier getting candidates of good quality if you could offer a level of flexibility at least, and not run on a dogmatic, somewhat out of date set of rules that even the House of Lords and Wales has managed to deal with. The IT is always going to be a concern, and actually connectivity in the borough is something that we're always going to have to factor into how this works, irrelevant of the quality of the IT. And on that note, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Long, followed by Councillor Gale.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to echo Councillor Keel's sentiments relating to the prohibition on hybrid meetings risking acting as a barrier to diversity in those standing for election, and also to echo Councillor Barker-Lomax's observations on the climate impact of this. I'd like to say something about the efficiency of the meetings themselves, subject to the IT working. In the last few months, I found myself unable to attend a committee meeting due to my caring responsibilities, necessitating the attendance of a substitute in my stead. And as with Councillor Austin, it happened at late notice. I'd already prepared for the meeting, and it also required my substitute to prepare at very short notice. In turn, I've acted as a substitute for one of my co-councillors who was unable to attend in person due to caring responsibilities. Both of us would have been able to participate in those committee meetings had it been permissible to do so in person. In the case of many of our committees, continuity of membership and context of what happens in those meetings mean that it would add to the efficacy of the business conducted in those meetings if the usual people could attend and could vote remotely. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gale, followed by Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I did think long and hard about this because I was a councillor during COVID when we all had to sit on Zoom and learn how to use it. And I think really once we all got back into the chambers, we found that we'd missed out because we didn't have the opportunity before or after meetings to actually chat to each other and discover other things that were going on. So I would hate it if we lost that opportunity. I do agree that it's difficult to get to some meetings. Having cared for both my parents, I was a carer, but I was also a councillor at the time. Sometimes it was actually quite nice to leave the house and go to a meeting and do something different. So I'm a little bit sceptical about whether this works. I wouldn't like to see meetings where members could zoom in for 5 minutes to vote and zoom back out again, because I don't think that's really serving the residents that we should be serving. So I think we would have to be incredibly careful if this did actually come in. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Williams, followed by Councillor Martin.
Yes, I think clearly the devil is in the detail here, and I'm delighted that we're approaching, I think, a consensus on this issue, and therefore I don't want to take up a lot of time. But I do want to just give a brief example, I think, of why the kind of inflexible approach that's currently prevailing is inappropriate, really. Because back in 2020, sadly, one of my colleague councillors on Godalming Town Council, Councillor Joe Purvis, contracted long COVID. And she still has, sadly, long COVID. And although at that time she could have continued to contribute valuably to that council, she felt it was necessary for her to resign, and the rules of attendance would have probably ultimately forced her to have resigned in any case. I don't think that's right. I don't think it was right that she was put in that position. And I do think we need that flexibility now in order to be able to actually be true to our own commitment to equality and diversity and inclusion.
Thank you. I have Councillor Martin, followed by Councillor Keane, then I have and then I have a interesting blank spot on the list, which I hope remains there.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I, like Councillor Coburn, find myself conflicted on this issue, and I know that there are lots of details yet to come. I am all for greater inclusion. I'm all for enabling more diversity in our council chamber. I'm all for enabling more people to do more for the community. But I am also all for the council being seen clearly to discharge its duties effectively, transparently and openly. I am pleased to see that this is not a left or right matter. I mean, I know that while the last government was opposed to remote meetings, it was, for instance, a Conservative peer, namely Baroness McIntosh, who proposed an amendment to the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill in October 2023 to enable remote meetings. And we've seen here tonight, many of my Conservative colleagues are very keen on this, even though I am not. I can see the case, Mr. Mayor, for some limited hybrid working where councillors are temporarily unable to attend a meeting in person. But we seem to want our bread buttered on both sides. Councillor Keane introduces the concept of many additional new members coming in who will permanently operate remotely, and that concerns me. I do fear that over time, many, if perhaps not most councillors, might choose to operate remotely, and I believe that that would be detrimental to transparency and openness. How many times in remote meetings do we see videos switched off and perhaps a photo put up in the place of the real person? I always look at that and say, are they there or not? So are they participating or not? In a planning meeting, might it not be very concerning to residents with when they're looking at when the planning committee are looking at a planning application, and the local resident may, I think, reasonably express considerable concern. In remote meetings with large numbers of participants, it's far harder to gauge the mood of the meeting. The interaction in a meeting involves far more than just verbal communication. Body language may be important. Informal chats with those around may be needed. Visible officer reaction to matters arising can be helpful. Even closing down the meeting and nipping into the mayor's room to discuss something would be kind of difficult remotely. And of course, there's much more. But I think above all, being visible, being clearly and physically present, and being seen to be conducting business is far easier with a meeting held in person. And what happens when the technology fails and councillors are not able to vote on crucial matters at a crucial time? So I'm far from convinced that the necessary safeguards can be built in to proposals for remote meetings. Will meetings in person become the norm with some exceptions? Once opened up, will remote meetings soon become the new norm? Something that I would be very unhappy to see. I realise that the motion before us doesn't bind us to the implementation of remote meetings. There's much work to do. It's a lobbying thing. But I am not sufficiently convinced, Mr. Mayor, to support the request to ask the government to enable legislation without seeing far more as to how it will be accomplished. I will vote against the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I have Councillor Keane, followed by Councillor Weldon.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, like Councillor Austin, I am very privileged to be a councillor in this chamber, and I prefer to attend. And I'm sure most of our councillors sitting around this table or this chamber would much more prefer to be in the chamber than on a Zoom. Zoom meetings are no joy. We all found that out during COVID. When we had to sit there for hours staring at a screen. Some people ended up with bad necks, other people ended up with eyesight being troublesome, and it's not a joy, and nobody would want to be sitting in front of a screen endlessly. But there is always going to be a time when someone cannot attend a meeting. And I think that has to be a very, very good reason given for not being in this chamber. And as, by the way, Councillor Lomax, 3 of us share a car to come to these meetings so that we cut down on the carbon footprint. And there's also the consideration of inclement weather, because it has been touched on, but if you live in somewhere that's called Little Switzerland, or you live in on the apex of a hill, it can be very difficult when the snow comes down. Thankfully, we don't have it so much now, but there have been times when we've actually been snowed in Hazelmere, and we haven't been able to come to a meeting. So to be able to come onto a Zoom meeting would be extremely helpful. The other thing I would like to say, I would hope that we haven't got lazy councillors in this chamber. I really hope we haven't. And if there is anybody that feels they'd rather be on Zoom than attend this meeting, I think they should really give a thought to why they are a councillor, because it's sad. It's really sad to think that. So I am supporting this, but I think there has to be very, very, very special circumstances given as to why a councillor cannot attend in person and has to attend on Zoom. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Weldon.
Thank you. I think there are two sides to this. There's a matter of the principle behind the motion. And like many others here, I am conflicted. I'm not a great fan of hybrid meetings. However, that is not actually what this motion is about. The substance of the motion is very simple. It is to ask government to delegate power to local authorities. On that basis, I really can't see a problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillors wish to speak? Councillor Hosseini, welcome.
Hello, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to you and the leader for your warm words at the beginning of the meeting. I agree that there is a need to attract more participation from a wider section of the community, to attract those who have not previously been involved in local politics. Logically, the more hurdles we can take down that would make life easier for those considering becoming councillors, the more people we will attract, especially those who have to fit council meetings around a busy work or family schedule, who would benefit from being able to participate remotely. However, it is important to consider at what cost this will come. It is important that as part of our collective goal of being an open and honest council, we are seen and heard by the public. The fact that members of the public can sit in the gallery and see the glimmer in our eyes and the expression on our faces, that's important. I think we could all tolerate a small number of councillors who have no choice but to attend virtually to do so. However, I worry that starting down this road will create an easy path for future councillors who may want to avoid scrutiny or, as others have mentioned, be lazy councillors who just want to stay at home. I would not like to see the day where the majority of us are sitting at home on our laptops and only a handful turn up in person. Studies have shown that 55% of communication is done through body language. How much body language and expression will we be able to see through a computer screen? We are all here to represent, to improve our community, and I believe the best way we can represent and make our case and stand up for the residents is to do so in person. Saying that, I've heard very persuasive arguments today, and I believe, as others have said, the devil is in the detail. And at this stage of the motion, we are just presenting this to government and looking for backing, and I think I'm ready to agree with it at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I call on the proposer to sum up, is there any last minute? Nope. Councillor Keele, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Thank you all so much for your thoughts during this debate. In preparation for this motion, I spoke with colleagues across the political spectrum and was very heartened by the support that the ideas in this motion received. And I also had some concerns raised which have been echoed this evening. I'll just draw on a few of the comments. I'd like to thank my seconder, Councillor Clark, and very much enjoyed the historical context that he provided. Councillor Austin, thank you for your kind words and for carefully considering my offer to second. I completely agree with you about the underrepresentation of different groups from our borough, particularly women. Councillor Coburn expressed her concerns about how the decision might be taken. Appropriate safeguards would be perfectly possible to be developed. This would enable people from all walks of life to become a councillor. And of course, completely agree, the IT would definitely need to be improved. Councillor Long. Thank you to Councillor Gale for her comments. I, of course, understand that many of us, myself included, would prefer the social interaction of being physically present in the room with colleagues. While the logistics of it may have worked during COVID, I completely understand that many would resist the idea of wholly remote meetings, and this motion doesn't suggest that. This motion doesn't seek to define any terms. It merely asks for permission to ask government to consider letting us to have the powers to decide for ourselves. Councils can then decide to implement whatever safeguards they feel are necessary. I also think we ought to consider perhaps the social interactions of those who would want to participate in public life but would be unable to attend, perhaps due to disability or illness, and that for some, being able to attend something online is an important interaction. Thank you to Councillor Martin for his comments. I was, of course, not suggesting that a number of new councillors would permanently operate remotely. It's not for me to determine anything with this motion. However, it's not beyond the skills of this council to ensure that there are the right measures in place to counter these concerns. However, in my view, anything to widen participation is worth exploring. Regarding the measures and the rules on this, we simply haven't discussed them or explored them because this is for council to determine should the law be changed, and the here and now is not the place to do this. Many thanks to Councillor Hosseini as well for his thoughts in his first speech at this council. So I very much appreciate Council's indulgence in this issue this evening, and I hope that members would consider supporting this motion so that we can move to the next steps and to see if government is receptive to allowing us to determine our own rules for ourselves. And finally, could I please request a recorded vote by roll call? Thank you.
Do you have... Very well, thank you very much. We will have a roll call, please.
Councillors, when I call your name, please state whether you wish to vote for, to vote against, or to abstain. Councillor Austin.
For.
Councillor Barker-Lomax.
For.
Councillor Beeman.
For.
Councillor Busby.
For.
Councillor Clark.
For.
Councillor Coburn.
Abstain.
Councillor Crowe.
For.
Councillor Davidson.
For.
Councillor Denis. Councillor Fairclough.
For.
Councillor Follows.
For.
Councillor Gale.
Abstain.
Councillor Hess.
For.
Councillor Hussaini.
For.
Councillor Higgins.
For.
Councillor Hyman.
Abstain.
Councillor Keane.
For.
Councillor Keel.
For.
Councillor Lawton.
For.
Councillor Long.
For.
Councillor MacLeod.
For.
Councillor Martin.
Against.
Councillor Merriweather.
For.
Councillor Miralese.
For.
Councillor Morrison.
For.
Councillor Munro.
For.
Councillor Murray.
For.
Councillor Nicholson. Councillor Ken Reid.
For.
Councillor Ruth Reid.
For.
Councillor Raleen. Councillor Paul Rivers.
For.
Councillor Penny Rivers.
For.
Councillor Rubini.
For.
Councillor Spence.
For.
Councillor Staunton.
For.
Councillor Steiger. Councillor Liz Townsend.
For.
Councillor Philip Townsend. Mr. Mayor.
For.
Councillor Weldon.
For.
Councillor White.
For.
And Councillor Williams.
For.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have 39 votes for, we have 1 vote against, and we have 3 abstentions.
Thank you very much. That is therefore carried. We will now move on to the motion put forward by Councillor Liz Townsend. I am looking at the clock and conscious of the digital hands ticking towards 10 o'clock. I won't at the moment put a motion to continue to you, but if we get very near 10 o'clock, we will have some decisions to make. Councillor Townsend, I notice you've been very abstemious and only given us 420 words. But would you like to put forward your motion?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I think I have a seconder.
Here's the second, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Williams, do you wish to speak immediately after the proposer, or do you wish to reserve your rights?
I'll reserve my rights.
Thank you very much. The last motion attracted an enormous amount of speakers, which was very cheering, but I would actually advise the 30-odd councillors who didn't speak that they will not be classed as lazy if they don't speak again. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The new government is proposing to invest approximately 22 billion in carbon capture and storage schemes. This investment equates to an amount equal to the black hole in the nation's finances inherited from the previous government. This huge investment is being put forward to capture carbon dioxide from major industry and pump it into another black hole under the North Sea. This is adopting a policy that the previous government was pushing, encouraging a business-as-usual approach, supporting their claims that the UK can continue to extract fossil fuels without undermining its net zero targets. Despite British homes being viewed as some of the worst insulated homes in Europe, in 2013, the government cut support for insulation and correspondingly, installation rates fell by around 90%. They also scrapped the Code for Sustainable Homes in 2015 in part of what was referred to as the bonfire of red tape. This also removed the ability of the council to demand homes of higher environmental qualities. It is predicted that 9 million homes plus could have been upgraded over the past 10 years had support for energy efficiency been maintained. That's almost a third of our national housing stock overall. So we know that we are starting on the back foot, but that makes this matter all the more urgent. We are requesting as a priority that this government reinstate this support for insulation and in adopting proven energy efficient building standards if we are to have any hope of meeting the country's 2050 climate targets. As we stated in our response to the government's proposed changes to the NPPF, we would like to see more requirements to build homes that require far less energy demands, such as passive house, and that every building should be net zero, achieved through a fabric-first approach. And as a council, we are doing what we can. We have carried out a deep retrofit of 7 council-owned homes on Oxford Ridge as a pilot for updating our council stock. We are now seeing annual savings in carbon per property from 3 tonnes in 2009 to 0.1 tonnes in 2024 post these works. Yes, that's 0.1 tonnes. And we are building new council homes to passive house standards, which can have about an 80% reduction in energy demand compared to a normal house. Our retrofit projects will provide invaluable information on the energy efficiency measures and green tech installed, providing a clear evidence-based approach to future retrofit projects and substantially reducing our carbon footprint for our housing stock and our tenants' energy bills. However, to achieve these savings for all residents across the borough and the country, we need a commitment from the government to increase their own commitment and funding to insulation measures and retrofitting. The current £1 billion scheme is only predicted to help around 300,000 households across the country, which is only about 1% of the overall housing stock. This is a drop in the ocean, or perhaps I should say the North Sea. This should be a priority for this government, with the commitment of more funding, even if that means a reduction in the funding for its carbon capture and storage scheme, which feels to me a bit like the next HS2, with spiralling costs and few returns. We would request that the government commits to more investment in less expensive and effective projects that it previously committed to in its Green Prosperity Plan, which committed them to funding in areas like renewable energy, flood defences and, of course, home insulation. We are urging the government to pause these carbon capture and storage plans and to direct these billions into green technologies. There are serious concerns being raised about the risks of the acceleration of climate change, the high costs of this process, the lack of evidence for the scalability of this technology, and the risk of leaks. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report last year stated that the implementation of these carbon capture and storage projects currently faces technological, economic, institutional, ecological, environmental and socio-cultural barriers, adding that the rates of CCS deployment are far below what is needed to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade or 2 degrees centigrade. Why would we invest so much into a technology that would not be required if we move to renewables as quickly as possible and where we can also take already recognised steps to reduce energy demands? This government has stated that climate change has to be central to everything that it does. And I think there are very many people in this chamber who would welcome that statement. Whilst carbon capture and storage may prove in the future to be part of a solution to the climate emergency, it should not be the first port of call. And we should not be praising the virtues of being a world leader in technologies that prolong our reliance on fossil fuels. I would therefore request members support the proposals outlined in this motion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Do I have speakers? Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, Councillor Townsend, for bringing this forward for debate. It is fact that we make too much carbon dioxide and we need to reduce, offset and remove this. Last year, the UK emitted 384 million tonnes of carbon dioxide. Carbon capture is the process of trapping carbon before it is released into the atmosphere from power generation and necessary traditional industrial processes. This project, announced last week, will draw in investment and support the economy in the northeast of England. The 21.7 project funding cost will be spread over the next 25 years and will create the capacity to store over 8.5 million tonnes of carbon dioxide each year. But it will also kickstart investment into the sector. 8 billion private investment has also already been committed. The motion commends the efforts of the new government, but it was then Chancellor and our MP, Jeremy Hunt, who last year announced 20 billion of investment in the carbon capture sector. Last week's announcement is a continuation of that vision. The Climate Change Committee, which advises the government, believes carbon capture is necessary for the UK to meet its climate targets. It is already built into the Net Zero 2050 calculation. Our reliance on polluting industries will lessen in years to come, but carbon capture is particularly useful in decarbonising some heavy industry, like, for example, cement production for those houses, for which there are currently few obvious alternatives. I'd just like to remind members that net zero by 2050 means that we reach a net carbon position, not a no carbon position. Because CCS and CDR, which is carbon removal, are hugely important new technologies for the future. I've missed a bit of my speech. Oh, dear me. Never mind. CDS and CDR are hugely important new technologies for the future. This long-term investment is a vital part of a whole package of measures to fight climate change. The UK does need to be a leader in the global race to decarbonise, but also to win investment, build new industries and create skilled jobs. We need to build on our reputation as global leaders, innovators and influencers in this area. just finally, on the bit that I've lost, the point about Waverley Borough Council, I just don't believe national government should make decisions based on a council stating its own climate emergency. A climate emergency is global. It's not just in Waverley Borough Council, so I don't agree with that point at all, I'm afraid. So thank you very much.
Councillor Staunton, and I don't have any more at the moment. That wasn't an invitation, but I'll take Councillor Follows.
Mr. Mayor, I remember Sir David King's book, The Hot Topic, much admired by Al Gore and possibly Councillor Williams too. It was a model of clarity, comprehensiveness, and above all, sanity. It found a middle ground in the climate debate. I think it was an important book. Sir David was a fan of carbon capture and thought it should be part of the mix. I think carbon capture could help tackle global warming and still keep the lights on. So I will vote against.
Councillor Follows, and then does anyone wish to follow?
Before we drift into that comedy bordering cliche. So, I mean, I wasn't actually intending to speak on this, but there's a few comments I just need to make. I have to say that I was actually really impressed by one of the first actions of the new government, which was to halt a number of fossil fuel extraction projects that were going on. And I only wish that there had been that kind of thinking in the run-up to, say, the decisions on UCOG Dunsfold and the numerous instances where Waverley Borough Council tried to prompt the government to rethink on that, whilst every single time that we did, the government doubled down on that. It is therefore a little bit difficult to then see quite how much energy, money and time is going into an unproven technology. And I'm sure there'll be others who will speak on that particular subject with more sense than me on this subject at 5 to 10. But realistically, we have so many things that we know will actually make a meaningful contribution to net zero. And I do understand what net zero means. A meaningful contribution now, as well as actually help people. Because, of course, one of the main problems that people ascribe to a pursuit of net zero is that they needlessly say that it's going to be unaffordable for residents because we're forcing them to make lots of different decisions. Whereas in many respects, a lot of the actions towards net zero actually make things cheaper for our residents than they use different energy and they're using less money to pay for it, particularly moving them off gas. So there are areas here where we should be making the point that net zero doesn't need to cost the earth. Specifically, it doesn't need to cost residents the earth in delivering it either. So what we're pushing here is to properly consider technology and practices they know will work now with that money to basically do the job, instead of effectively saying, you can keep polluting pretty much the way you are, we'll find ways to make it disappear. There has to actually be a cultural shift and an economic shift in the mode of production to actually achieve this. I realise I've drifted into a nearly Marxist kind of language in terms of mode of production, but it is clearly that we need that kind of paradigm shift in the way the economy works. And all this is doing is allowing the economy to pretend that they can carry on doing the same thing without making any damage or making any harm. What we're proposing here actually helps residents as well as meeting our carbon objectives. So I think the motion is reasonable. I think it's quite proper for local government across the patch to say things to government that they believe in, because we operate in an area where most of the things that actually impact people on the ground are frankly done at local government level. And it is entirely right and proper for individual councils, groups of councils, the LGA, the DCN, the CCN, etc., to make these points. So I again support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ken Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I won't be too long because I'm sure it's past my normal bedtime. But if I could build on what Councillor Follows has just been saying, carbon capture and storage is not a proven technology. Some of the comments that have been made suggest that it's there waiting to go, but it isn't. And we have actually been talking about carbon capture and storage for at least 20 years, if not 30 years. And it reminds me of another unachievable dream, and that is the subject of nuclear fusion. We've been talking about that since I was a schoolboy, and it is always just around the corner. But actually, we've only managed to achieve it in a very small nanosecond experiment so far. That's after 50 years. So I don't think carbon capture and storage is going to work. It's certainly not available now, and we could certainly spend that money elsewhere and gain some benefits for the country as a whole. I will be supporting the motion.
Do I have any other speakers other than the seconder and the proposer? Councillor Williams.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will be very brief because whilst I commend the efforts of the new government to take action in pursuit of UK climate targets, I am really concerned that the focus on carbon capture, utilisation and storage is misdirected. And I think it was, it's an unproven technology. I think Jeremy Hunt got it wrong as well. It might surprise you to know that is my view on this. A report that was actually published only yesterday by the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis, I think really says it all when it describes the UK carbon capture plans as, I quote, a costly distraction from genuine green investments. And it does describe carbon capture as costly, complex and risky, with a risk of underperformance and delays. It refers to how the UK will become more reliant on fossil fuel imports for decades to come at a time of increased global instability. And that's not a good thing. It describes how carbon capture will not advance the decarbonisation agenda or stimulate genuine green economic growth. And that's what we really need to be pushing, a Green New Deal and proper green growth. And it also suggests that the UK should focus its resources on accelerating the deployment of technologies with these proven decarbonisation credentials, like insulation, renewable power, heat pumps, electric vehicles, public transport, grid capacity and flexibility. So I think it is right that this should be reconsidered, and we therefore are urging a government facing this significant economic challenge and a disastrous economic legacy from its predecessor uses its resources well and wisely and diverts resources away from the nebulous and unproven notion of carbon capture to proven measures to reduce carbon emissions. And we know here in Waverley what needs to be done to actually reduce our carbon footprint and actually to support certainly our social housing tenants in terms of what we can do in terms of social housing. And I would very much urge councillors to actually go with the proven rather than the unproven.
Thank you, Councillor Townsend. As the proposer, would you like to sum up, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I admire the optimism of Councillor Austin about carbon capture, and I am aware of the funding being split over 25 years. However, in that time, if you listened to my speech earlier, if we had that 25 years, we could do almost the whole housing stock across the UK with insulation, and we could use a simple and known, proven technology to reduce down everybody's bills. And wouldn't that be an amazing thing that we could do? And I would also say that you talked about the jobs that are created by carbon capture. I would also say that renewable energy also creates sustainable and really highly skilled and good jobs for people as well. I wasn't completely discounting carbon capture. It needs to be proven. It may be in the mix, but it shouldn't be a priority. We should be using now the technology that we know works in order to help our residents in Waverley and across the country with reduced bills. And more importantly, we should be also reducing our emissions and as quickly as possible. And we do owe that to the next generation as well. So I would urge you to think about supporting this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. We will then put it to the vote. Your little lights will go on soon.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, can I have a recorded vote? Apologies.
Do you really
Please.
need it?
I'm sorry, could I please?
We'll do it quick.
Okay.
Councillors, when I call your name, please state whether you wish to vote for, vote against or abstain. Councillor Austin.
Against.
Councillor Barker-Lomax.
Abstain.
Councillor Beeman.
For.
Councillor Busby.
For.
Councillor Clark.
For.
Councillor Crowe.
For.
Councillor Davidson.
Against.
Councillor Denis. Councillor Fairclough.
For.
Councillor Follows.
For.
Councillor Gale.
Abstain.
Councillor Hess.
Absolutely for.
Councillor Hussaini.
Abstain.
Councillor Higgins. For. Councillor Keane.
For.
Councillor Keel.
For.
Councillor Lawton.
For.
Councillor Long.
For.
Councillor MacLeod.
For.
Councillor Martin.
Against.
Councillor Merriweather.
For.
Councillor Mirrlees.
For.
Councillor Morrison.
For.
Councillor Munro.
Abstain.
Councillor Murray.
Abstain.
Councillor Nicholson. Councillor Kenreid.
For.
Councillor Ruth Reid.
For.
Councillor Paul Rivers.
For.
Councillor Penny Rivers.
For.
Councillor Rabini.
For.
Councillor Spence.
For.
Councillor Staunton.
Against.
Councillor Steiger. Councillor Liz Townsend.
For.
Councillor Philip Townsend. Mr. Mayor.
For.
Councillor Weldon.
For.
Councillor White.
For.
And Councillor Williams.
For.
How many against did you vote for? 6, 3, 6, 6. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You have 30 votes for, 4 votes against and 6 abstentions.
Very well, councillors, that is carried, and I'm pleased to say that is the end of the meeting.